Hello and welcome to the live stream. A little bit different from normal, different time change anyway. Here we are at 1 o'clock Spanish time. Wherever you are in the world, if you're joining us, welcome. I hope this has worked to your advantage, this different time slot that we've got this week, partly due to rush trip I had to make to Europe, to UK, Monday, Tuesday this week, back again, which had to sort of it affected everything else. So this is the only slot I got to do a little bit of live streaming. So I hope it works for you. And if it doesn't, and you're listening to this or watching this retrospectively, welcome anyway. And this is the slot. Not much I could do about it really. So there we are, and got the Chinese Grand Prix this weekend. Wow, that's going to be an interesting one, very interesting one, I think, because it's a return to the circuit that some of the drivers know, but not all. I suppose most of them do these days, just from the amount of sim work they do. Good job Kimmy's not around anymore. You know, who needs the sim? I don't need the sim. I just go. And it's a good circuit. Let's have a look at it, actually. I brought, this is the circuit map that Mercedes put out, which is very nice. Thank you very much. You can see there that, for me, the most interesting sector is sector 2 for sure. It's brilliant. You see that corner I've been talking about in previous live streams, which is actually turns out to be turn 7. I could never remember the number, but that left-hander, 270 kilometers an hour. That's about 170 miles an hour, maybe 168, something around that. Very quick. They've got it 7th gear. That's in a Mercedes, of course. Probably in a Red Bull, it's 8th gear. Who knows? But that's a really impressive corner. There's a lot of talk when they get to China about turn 1 and all the rest of it. It's a very interesting corner, obviously increasing radius, but it's so tight at the end that it kind of doesn't mean that much, and it invites everybody to have a sort of early turn in short corner thing. So you'll see a lot of drivers looking as if they, oh wow, yes, Lando, short corner, mega into turn 1. But it's just the way you got to do that. You can't do anything else into there. But that, for me, that turn 7 is the corner in Shanghai. I really love that corner. And there's a bit of I wouldn't say it was a straight, there's a little bit of an area afterwards, as you can see, before they go into turn 8, which is a right-hander, where they're just flat on the power. And so you do get a reward if you're really quick through turn 7. How well that'll be covered by TV, I have no idea. But I still have memories, going back a long way now, when Mark Webber was in the Jaguar, in qualifying, going through 7, he had a massive moment mid-corner. It was like full stop, opposite lock mid-corner. Woo, yeah. Even, watching it was bad enough. But you know what Mark was like. He used to get amazing angles, didn't he? And he got away with it really good. So yeah, just any other thoughts? The long back straight, DRS there, and they go into the hairpin. That weird turn 16, the left-hander, which is, it's probably quicker than it looks, but because it's sort of, you don't want to get on the curbs, and been lots of shunts coming out of there, it's a bit slippery. I wonder, it's a significant corner, that, and it's interesting that 2 of the most interesting corners are left-handers in China, I think. And then there's another DRS zone on that straight as well. So that's one thing, and it's a good circuit. This is Herman Tilke when he was being imaginative and getting on with it, and really nice corners there, I think. Very good. The big deal this weekend, of course, is that it's a sprint weekend. The good news is that they've changed the regulations since last year. You probably know all this already, but for those that don't, last year, once you went into Parc Fermé for the sprint race, it didn't matter what happened, you could not then touch the setup of the car. So if you didn't get it right, basically on Friday, it affected your whole weekend. They've changed that rule now, and there are 2 different Parc Fermés. There's one for the sprint race and then one for the Grand Prix proper. So after the sprint, if your car is bouncing, bottoming, too high a ride height, not enough downforce, whatever it is, you can make adjustments to that. And that's quite a significant change, because if you think about that famous race that George Russell won in Brazil, that was mainly because Red Bull, for once, got the ride heights completely wrong on their car, sim work or whatever, or it was less bumpy than they thought. And they couldn't do anything about it because they were locked into Parc Fermé for the sprint race. So that could change, and that's a good thing. And my other thought is that going into this weekend, having had 2 really bad qualifying sessions, this is quite good news for Charles Leclerc, because what he needs is to get out there and really get it together in qualifying. And he's got 2 attempts to do that, qualifying for the sprint and then qualifying for the Grand Prix. So for Charles, I'll be very surprised if Charles Leclerc isn't really quick this weekend in qualifying. And I think, by which I mean, Red Bull, obviously, I think will still have the advantage, but I think he'll be right up there this time. This weekend we'll watch for that, and he'll be enjoying the format, I suspect. And the format is untimed practice on Friday, then qualifying for the sprint in the afternoon, and then the sprint race early on Saturday morning European time, and then qualifying after that, assuming the cars are still in one piece, for the Grand Prix proper. And that's, I say assuming the cars are in one piece. One of my reservations has always been about this whole sprint format, that you don't ever want to come up with anything that dilutes the Grand Prix. And you can be, anything can happen in a race situation, turn one, racing accident, whatever it is, and if you've got a very good car that's potentially able to be on the front row and for the Grand Prix and maybe to win the Grand Prix, and to have something stupid go on, not your fault, in the sprint race, I can't think of many examples yet of where that's happened, but I just hope it doesn't happen, because it's then it would be the purity of the sport being affected by something that's there for the show. Speaking of which, it's interesting, isn't it? They've got the sprint race there to make Formula One obviously more appealing, I would guess. That's what they're thinking: more overtaking, more races, more this, more that. And it's on at, I don't know what time of the day in Europe, but it's very early morning. You're talking about 4 o'clock in the morning or something on Saturday morning. And you wouldn't have thought, well, I suppose in America that's fine, but certainly for European, they're not getting the European viewers. I wouldn't have thought live TV viewers, unless they're all going to get up at that hour and watch it. You would have thought they would, it's just a thought. You would have thought they would have chosen a race which has got a better sort of neutralized time zone for sprint racing, so you get a maximum audience. In other words, an Saturday afternoon audience and a Sunday afternoon audience for the Grand Prix. That's what you would have thought, but that's only what I would have thought, I suppose. What else can I show you about the Circuit Mac? Pirelli put out some quite interesting stuff. They've just got a sort of medium range of tyres going there. It's a big question mark for them because, of course, the whole wheel rim's changed. 18-inch now. It's 13 when they last raced there. So everything's changed from their point of view. Completely clean sheet of paper. They're going with a sort of medium range compound. You can see traction, it's sort of medium. Asphalt, well, interesting, asphalt abrasion, asphalt grip. There's a lot of talk about the track surface having been painted, which is something they can do from time to time, and nobody seems to know what sort of paint was used and what effect it's going to have and what the bumps are like, which seems odd to me. You'd imagine that everybody would be doing mega amount of homework and sending people out in advance to the circuit just to have a look at everything. But reading between the lines of what everyone's saying, nobody has been doing that, which is a bit strange. But it's possible that the track surface is completely different to what anybody's imagined. They're saying track evolution 5, well, that's fair enough because it hasn't been used very much, and it's obviously going to rubber in as the weekend progresses. Tire stress, yeah, a lot of fast, long corners. Lando Norris saying, oh, I don't think this circuit will go very well for us. Said it yesterday in a press conference because it's got lots of long corners, which, I don't know. Who am I to say, to question Lando? But I mean, it just seems a very odd thing that the car could be good on short corners. And not by which I don't mean short corners driver-wise. I mean, not a long corner. Maybe that's the right way to phrase it. Or change of direction. Maybe that's what he means. And not good on long corners. I think the reality is I don't think anybody's really good on long corners with these cars. And I think you'll be surprised at how good the McLaren is what I'm really getting around to saying. I can't imagine they're just going to be pathetically slow all of a sudden because you've got a turn 1 or a turn 7, which is really going to hurt them. They've got a reasonable amount of downforce they can run. I would have thought a more logical assumption from McLaren would be, given the downforce they've got, which gives them the sweet spot they want, they may be hurt by the length of the straights here. I would have thought that would be more up their street. Or maybe they're thinking, because we've got to be competitive on the straights because they're so long, it is going to hurt us when we take downforce off on those long corners. So maybe it's that. He's saying it in reverse, if you see what I mean. So that could be what that's all about. Braking, yeah, obviously because it's high-speed braking, it's going to be tough on brakes. Lateral load, yeah, lots of long, fast corners. And downforce, mid-range downforce, because it's got those long straights, so you don't want to have too much downforce on the car. So all in all, quite an interesting place really to go to, and I think if you haven't seen Shanghai before, you're going to enjoy it. As I said, the big question for me is how many people there'll be in the grandstands, because we've never ever had a crowd in China. I say we, probably they've never had a crowd in China, sort of make-believe crowd around the start-finish line and coloured seats and everything else, but it's never been a spectator event. So it'd be interesting to see if Liberty and Formula One and FIA have done their homework and they've gone there in advance and done a massive amount of pre-race promotion, and they've got 300, 400,000 fans there. Not. I don't think that's going to happen. But really, if you think about it, that's what should have happened. Last winter, you should have had Max and a few others, Lewis, out in China saying, right, we're coming back, we're on the calendar, let's get this race going. Want to see 500,000 people there, whatever it is. No reason why it shouldn't be. But I don't think that sort of promotion's been going on. It'd be nice to think that it has. So, so that's that. We'll get on to all the questions and answers questions and comments that you guys want to make very soon. Just a couple of other things I want to say. Martin Tomlinson, who I mentioned quite a lot, very good artist, motor racing artist, lovely guy. Going back a couple of live streams now, when somebody asked a question about the best overtakes that I'd ever seen, and I mentioned some obvious ones. And I don't know if I mentioned Nigel passing Berger in Mexico in 90, 89, yeah, 90. But if I didn't, I should have. Anyway, Martin said, interesting to see the question about the best overtaker. Difficult to come up with these, but for him, the best overtake he ever witnessed was Jackie Ickx passing Niki Lauda on the outside of Paddock Bend in the wet, 1974 Race of Champions at Brands Hatch. And yeah, absolutely. Great pass by Jackie Ickx. He was really quick in the wet that day. He started, from memory, midfield or something in the Lotus 72. And it was his first season at Lotus, and Niki Lauda's first season at Ferrari. So they were both in their sort of new teams, and Niki was leading quite easily. And by the time Jackie got up to P2, you just thought the race was over and it was going to be Niki. But Ickx was so quick, and he remorselessly caught him. And a bit like Niki losing the 78 British Grand Prix to Carlos Reutemann due to Bruno Giacomelli being lapped and in front of Niki, and Niki not really sure what side to pass him, and Carlos zapping him down the inside of clearways. A little bit like that. Niki caught a BRM. I think it was Henri Pescarolo in the BRM, lapping him. And of course in the wet, and in those days there was no GPS or anything like that, and you could barely see the flag signals, let alone the guy see in the mirrors. So he'd spent sort of half a lap trying to get past Pescarolo, and by the time he did, Ickx was right on his tail and just did him on the outside of paddock and pulled away pretty impressively. So that, yeah, I totally get that. And then great win for Ickx. And then he said also Jochen Rindt passing both Jackie Ickx and Piers Courage at Copse Corner 69 International Trophy. Wow. I don't remember that at all, but because there wasn't a lot of coverage for the International Trophy 69 from memory, but wow, really, yeah. I mean, I'll take your word for it, Martin. Sounds fabulous. And then immediately afterwards, lapping Rodriguez and Graham Hill at the next corner, which presumably was Chapel. So that was Jochen Rindt. Yeah, pretty aggressive, pretty good overtaker, you could say. And then he says, this is Martin Tomlinson, anyone who passed anyone going to North Tower at Crystal Palace in a Formula 2 race, yeah, very quick right-hander. And you had to be very, very skillful to pass cars into that right-hander. Great, very quick corner. And nice to hear you mention Super Swede, Ronnie Peterson, Monaco 73, when I talked about that morning when I got up, and it was very early morning, and there was Ronnie, before anybody else was out in the circuit really, sort of glancing the guardrail coming out of Casino Square with about, I think I said full opposite lock, I probably meant 45 degrees of opposite lock. Anyway, Martin said, how about this? There's Ronnie in 74 the following year, coming through the chicane, a little bit of oversteer on the car. Niki Lauda in the aforementioned Ferrari that he was driving at Brands Hatch. And looks like Jody Scheckter there in the back of the group there going through the chicane. So thank you very much indeed for that, Martin. Excellent. Really, really good. Anything else I want to say? Oh yeah, just from the get-go. I've got lots of friends in motor racing, as you know, and well, as you know, I have been around long enough to have a reasonable number of friends in motor racing. And a friend of mine was recently touring Europe and thought, wow, you know, Audi, they're doing a Formula 1 team, aren't they? Let's go and see what that looks like. Where are they doing the car? And they're doing the car at a place called well, very near their Ingolstadt, but it's Nürburgring. It's their sort of where they got their test track, or it's high performance sort of hooligan track, probably more than anything else. And it's where they run the motorsport thing from. So that's where they're designing the Audi Formula One car and engine and powertrain and everything for 2026. Nothing happening yet at Hinwil, but they're going to race operate it, of course, from Hinwil, Sauber. But this is where the work is taking place. So he sent me these pictures, and he came, he said, surely there would be, because he was there at the weekend, and I thought, well, you can see. I said, well, it looks a bit barren, doesn't it? And so I said, when is that? And he said, oh, it's just last weekend. I said, weekend? Where's everybody? I mean, they don't stop working when you're doing a new Formula One car, do they? When you get to the weekend. And there's another one, completely empty. There's another. And he just snapped these and said, oh, you might be interested in that, because and I have to say, I've done the same thing. You go to Milton Keynes and you think, oh, I was going to look at Red Bull, see what they look like. And even if it's a Sunday afternoon, there are sort of 400 cars outside, absolutely jam-packed, as there are with virtually all the Formula One teams that I've ever known. There's always nowhere to park a car. But look at this. And I don't know what that is. I mean, for sure, that is where they're doing the car, but I can't understand why there aren't lots of people working there at the weekend. It seems very odd to me. There's no reason why they shouldn't, of course, because of the August break thing, fair enough, but we're not in August yet. And this is a new car they're doing for 26, for Pete's sake. So I was astonished by the sort of Mary Celeste element of that whole Audi setup, and wonder what's going on. Actually, thinking about it, and I'm thinking as I speak here, when Williams were with BMW, admittedly BMW at that time run by Gerhard Berger, so they should have known what they were doing. I do recall that he never tried to ring anybody at BMW Formula One Motorsport after sort of midday Friday, because they weren't there, they went home. I don't know, maybe they're all working from home still. Maybe that's what's going on at Audi. They're all working from home. Yeah, work from home. Can you design a Formula One car working from home? Not convinced. Anyway, it'd be interesting to see. I imagine when Andreas Seidel, I'm kind of putting these pictures up in case he doesn't know, because I would imagine he would be thinking, we need to crack on here. I don't think there's a rule where Formula One waits for new teams if they're not ready, is there? No, don't think so. So yeah, anyway, I thought that was quite interesting. Anyway, enough of all that. Let's get on to questions. And the first is, I'm going to try and get it really right this time. This is people, you folk who have been lining up with your questions before we went live. And here is the first. Before we do anything, I'm just going to make sure I go back to my YouTube page and it says, you are live. Yeah, I am live. Good. That's what it says anyway. I have to believe it. This is from G33RTJEH. Okay, good name. Hi, Peter. What are your thoughts about the progress being made between the different teams, Suzuka 23 versus Suzuka 24? How much is the difference affected by the cars, and how much comes from other differences? A little bit from outside things. Between 23 and 24 wasn't a lot of time, so tyres may be slightly different, and the regulations barely change. So it's all about development on the cars, and that's the speed that Red Bull have found. Impressive, eh? It makes the car easier to drive too. No offense here to Sergio Perez, but when he's able to get the car that near max around a circuit like Suzuka, you know that Red Bull RB20 basically is a very, very good car. Predictable, easy to set up, responds to changes, all the things that you want, and it's still quick in a straight line, has enough downforce to do the job on the corners. So Red Bull have done a great job over the winter, and they've really improved that car. Other teams have gone backwards, like Alpine, good example. And others, like Haas, have just got clean the sort of floor of the workshop and just got everything back to basics and just doing a very good job on the things that matter. So that kind of accounts for them. But in general, I'd say it is all about the teams and the work they've done on the cars and how easy or not they've made them to drive, and for the drivers to get the best from them. And that's what we're seeing right now. And still Red Bull way ahead of the rest. McLaren have done a good job. Aston Martin, reasonable job. Ferrari, a very, very good job. Second best job really, maybe even a better job than Red Bull, because they had a more difficult baseline from which to build for 24, and they've actually made a lot of ground. I think they always said, we hope we've gained 50% of the gap that was there over the winter, and I think they have, and that's a lot. Whereas I think McLaren have probably gained about 15-20% of the gap, and Mercedes maybe 5%, it would seem. Aston Martin probably about where, a little bit more than Mercedes, between Mercedes and McLaren. So good question there. Thank you very much for that. Right, let's have a look at all this. Next one. Same question, same questioner. Since you often bring up the 21N disgrace, some board members at Mercedes believe that a few parties had an agreement to spice up the 21 finale by running the engines on Lewis's car outside of to close the gap to Red Bull. But with the deal including that Lewis would not become world champion, they believe that Mercedes forgot about the second part of the deal, and this is the reason for it, for the emergency act by Mr. Massey, and that is why Mercedes didn't fight harder. So you're saying that you think that they had big engines just to make the racing more interesting, but they never wanted Lewis to win the championship because the big engine would have been discovered. I don't buy that. It's very well policed, the whole engine thing. They're absolutely sealed, and given the visibility of Formula One now, I just don't see any chance that would have been the case. I think that's just classic conspiracy theory people with not much better to do, sitting around a coffee shop somewhere and coming up with an idea. Sadly, but thanks for all your questions. Got 2 super chats straight away. Better have a look at these. M.A. Khan, thank you very much. M.A. Khan, very nice. Hi, Anthony Davidson compared Lewis and Max lines at Suzuka. He said they were very different. Max was driving a shallow line with a better exit, Lewis a wider line. What's the advantage of each? What corner was this, I wonder? When I was watching Lewis through the S's, he was really good out of 1B and into turn 2, the beginning of the S's. Really good. Degner's too. Hairpin Lewis is always way out in the boonies somewhere. Spoon, yeah, maybe there, maybe, but I don't think the Mercedes was brilliant there. To me, it's a much more difficult car to drive, the Mercedes, and I think Lewis is constantly looking for what he feels is the sweet spot of the car, which is a place where he can do what he wants with it. And to do that, he's got to get the temperatures exactly where he needs them. And he's constantly playing around with that. And that's why often, and we saw it a couple of years ago, he starts using wider lines sometimes just to energize the tires. But he's definitely, as we saw, he couldn't hold himself back coming out of 1B at Suzuka, going into the S's. A just beautiful, if you like, short corner entry into turn 2. Fabulous. And it put him in good stead all the way up the hill. But then he lost that sweet spot. And when he does that, when that happens to him, then he just tries everything. And he tries braking in a straight line for longer, going in deeper. And that's the beauty of Lewis. He's still got all those different things he can play with. So I think to come out with a definitive comment and say that that Max was driving this way and Lewis was that, I think that's not the case, in my opinion, with all due respect to Anthony, obviously. NC Paddock, another super chat. Thank you. Hello, Peter. Hope you're having a great day. I am indeed. Thank you very much. What do you make of all the talk about Adrian Newey being spotted arriving in Maranello? I just think it's getting a bit carried away. Well, the last time he spoke to Ferrari, he did go there to meet Luca. I don't think it was at Maranello. I think they met somewhere else away from Ferrari for obvious reasons. And he was spotted then by somebody who actually did a selfie with him and got his autograph, without realizing that, wow, this is quite significant. Adrian's in Italy. Adrian could be in Italy for a million reasons. He could be there just to wind everybody up. Of course, that's a good reason. And it could be there because it's a nice place to be this time of year. It could be because he's having chats. I don't think that if Adrian was seriously talking to Ferrari, or they were offering him the 1 billion euros I've been speaking about for over a year that they should have offered him 5 years ago. If they were doing that, why would he need to go to Italy to do that deal? He wouldn't, would he? Especially if he didn't want Red Bull to know about it. So the odds of that being anything other than, just a normal trip, pretty small, I think. But yeah, everyone's going to love all that, aren't they? Konrad Gubansky. Hi, Konrad. Afternoon, Peter. Appreciate your content. What are your thoughts on Can-Am? So much history and innovation there for teams like McLaren, Chaparral, Lola, Porsche. Plenty of Formula One driver crossover too. Yeah, I just love the Can-Am. Everything about it. Everything about it at the time, to have these Formula One cars. I mean, don't forget, it kind of sort of began in '65 when they're still in 1.5 litre Formula One cars, and these Can-Am cars were much quicker than the Formula One cars, and it was a big deal. And I obviously '66 it changed when the 3 litres came in, but those McLarens when they hit the road, the M6s, the orange, and Denny and Bruce, it was just the most beautiful thing. And the sign writing, the Bruce McLaren and the Kiwi, just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The chaparrals. And then you'd have Jackie Stewart in a Mecom Lola, Graham Hill in '65 in a McLaren M1A, Jimmy Clark and Richie Ginther in Lotus 40s at Riverside. I mean, it was just brilliant. It all began before that. I mean, Jimmy drove a Lotus 23 and a Lotus 19, Arciero Brothers Lotus 19 in 63, 64, around there. And so long before that, it became the Can-Am, Canadian American Challenge Cup. But Johnson Wax got behind it very early on. So it was a really big deal. It's a lot of money there. And then you'd have the Stardust Grand Prix, which John Surtees won in Vegas in '66 in his Team Surtees Lola, the beautiful T70 Spider. The Can-Am cars were beautiful, and they all looked different, unlike today's World Championship sports cars. They all look different. They all had their characteristics, and they often got Formula One drivers, as you say, to come over and steer them. And so you'd have Jim Hall, racing with Denny Hulme. One of the funniest things I've ever seen, and you can Google it on YouTube if that's not a contradiction of terms. There is a video of Denny Hulme in one Can-Am. It's at Riverside, I think. It's probably '67, I would guess, something like that. And he's obviously had a shunt in the first corner and damaged the bodywork. And he comes in at the end of the first lap, goes into the McLaren pit, and instead of sort of repairing it, they just rip off the broken bits, and he goes on, rejoins the race, thrashes it down the pit lane, gets to the end of the pit lane, and there's a marshal there with cross flags not letting him out because the ACUS, maybe, I don't know who they were, the stewards or the marshals, have said the bodywork's damaged, that car isn't allowed back on track until they do proper repairs. And you can see Denny, then the next camera is Denny sort of gesticulating with this guy saying, get out of the way, the car's fine, we know what we're doing. And the guy just will not let him out. So Denny puts the McLaren into reverse and floors the throttle to go back to the McLaren garage. Luckily, there's nothing else going on in the pit lane. He must have been doing 100 miles an hour going backwards down the pit lane. And I think it's Ken Mackay, was it? The commentator says, holy mackerel, I've never seen anything like this. It was just brilliant. Anyway, I just love that Can-Am. And so many good things happen in the Can-Am, so many good drivers. And even going right through to the RC Cola, George Fulmer days with the Porsche 91710s, brilliant. Mark Donoghue 91730. Yeah, I mean, why did it have to stop? It's such a shame. And then Europe did that sort of weird inter-series thing, which was never the same. Didn't have the same atmosphere, and they're quite ugly cars, really, and sort of Herbert Muller and Jürgen Neuhaus and all those guys, I remember when Carlos Reutemann had to do those BMW M1 races at the end of Formula One qualifying. There were 5 Grand Prix drivers who had to get in the M1s and race against all these German guys who were practicing, it was their team. I remember Carlos saying how, all these guys, Jürgen Neuhaus and Helmut Kellners, he was absolutely scared stiff of them all. Stayed as far away from them as he possibly could. Muller was quick, there wasn't it? Herbert Muller. Sadly, of course, it was so ironic. That's where Pedro lost his life in one of those inter-series races, sort of European version of the Can-Am, which was never really quite the same. Now, the Can-Am had everything. The romantic circuits, the cars, the teams. Pete Lyons' reports in Autosport were a part of it as well. Guys like Peter Revson, talk about dead cool, and Jim Hall, just wonderful, wonderful days. Whenever I see a Can-Am McLaren, I think, motor racing. Thank you for that question. The answer went on too long, for sure. Anyway, there we go. Oliver Pointeux. Hope I pronounced that correctly, Oliver. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well. Considering Liam Lawson's performance last season and the impending shake-up in team rosters anticipated for 25, do you see him clinching a seat? Yeah, well, I do. But having said that, anything stupid can happen, can't it? Just like Carlos Sainz could be sacked by Ferrari, and so it'd be pointless to say yes for sure he will be there, but I'd like to think he'll be in that going back in the Visa Cash App seat for 25, if not before. I think he's a completely wasted talent, and he should be in Formula One right now. Really, really talented guy. I mean, Marcus Armstrong's probably sitting back thinking, well, what about me? And he's quite right. I mean, they were pretty close, those two. They're both Kiwis, and Marcus, different sort of driver, but very quick as well. So, you know, I feel a bit for him. Nobody's really talking about him anymore, but Liam definitely is massive talent, a lot of car control, brave, gets on with it. Got a lot of time. I mean, he and Yuki, really good team, actually, I think. Very good young next generation team. LA Flame, hi Peter, is Red Bull scared to sign Fernando or Carlos actually to race Max in the same car? I think they should prove us wrong and see if Max can race clean when under pressure. Why? Why do they need to do that? They've got Max doing a perfect job in the car, and he's got Perez in the other car, which is part of Max being as relaxed and as good as he is. Without Perez there or somebody of his ilk, Max wouldn't be the driver I think that he is right now. Maybe he would for a race or two, but over a season, if he had George Russell in the other car, it would ruffle his feathers. I don't think Carlos Sainz would be a problem for him at all, but I think the issue there is, why would Red Bull replace Perez with Sainz? I can think of a few reasons. You guys probably can or can't, but they're not. You know, they are interchangeable, I think, and that's a possibility. And I think if Red Bull said to Max, yeah, we're going to run Sainz, only because we think he's got a few more years on him, you know, in him that maybe Perez doesn't have, whatever reason they want to come up with, I think Max will say, yeah, it's fine. Fernando, I don't think he'd be so happy with, not because he wouldn't be confident of beating him, but because, as I've said before in other live streams, Fernando's got a bit of a history of being in teams with a quick driver in the other car, and basically the team implodes within half a season unless everything's focused around Fernando. So that's why Red Bull did not sign Fernando when he left Ferrari, because they felt he was going to be a divisive influence on the team. And they're probably right. And with Max, they've got Max, so the last thing they'd want to do is dilute Max with a Fernando. And they're not interested to see how Max goes against Fernando. All they want to do is win races and win world championships, which is what they're doing. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, would be their final comment, I think. Mike Bartel, thank you for taking my question. Do you think Carlos could be without a team next year? As good as he is that even possible? Yeah, it is. You know, well, I think it's almost inconceivable that Sauber stroke Audi wouldn't offer him a drive, and I think they will and probably have already, but he may well say no, because he doesn't want to spend a year driving a Sauber midfield when he's been racing and winning and doing the things he does at Ferrari, beating Charles Leclerc in a Ferrari. You know, why would you then want to be midfield in a Sauber? So that's the problem for him. Maybe Red Bull will offer him that drive instead of Sergio Perez, but from Carlos's point of view, quite difficult to go in there and, you know, beat Max. And if you can't beat Max, I'm not saying from talent point of view, I think there are a couple of things where Carlos would be really good, but you know, Max knows the team inside out, he knows the engineers, he knows everything. It's very difficult for Sainz to get in and just be as strong at Red Bull as he has been at Ferrari. Very difficult, even over a 2 or 3 year period. And then if he went to Mercedes, it seems that the love affair with the great Kimi would preclude him being there for more than a year. So why would he want to be there for a year with George in the other car? It's something to do, I suppose. They could get that deal. Maybe you do 1 year at Mercedes and then go to Audi. Don't have to do that year at Sauber. And from Mercedes' point of view, it wouldn't be a bad thing, because then they could run Kimi in 26. But no, at the moment, as we think Kimi's going to be in the car, from Monza onwards. So in a car anyway, and possibly racing a Mercedes in 25, probably will be. So if that's the case, then you're saying, well, there will be teams that will offer him a drive, but would he accept them? I don't think he would. Maybe not. It's a terrible situation. As I've said in various live streams, it goes against the flow of life. And right now, Carlos Sainz should be on the crest of a wave. He's achieved heights at Ferrari that perhaps even he thought he'd never achieve. And And that's all been taken away from him by having to leave the team at the end of the year. It's the most ridiculous situation. Again, you can't blame Lewis for accepting an offer to go to Ferrari, because from his point of view, it's a great solution to what has become a rather uncomfortable and sticky end to his career. So he's going to end it in new colours, new cars, new air, new engineers, everything different. And he'll enjoy it. For sure he'll love it. He'll probably win a race or two at Ferrari as well. So why wouldn't you? Can't blame him for that. But I can blame Ferrari, because why do they need to do that? They've got Charles Leclerc. They've got Carlos Sainz. What's Lewis going to bring to Ferrari that they don't already have already? They need a championship winning car. They don't need a driver who's won 7 world championships. And if you've got a championship winning car, Charles Leclerc can do the job, thank you very much. And so can Carlos Sainz. Another super chat from Melissa Cruz. Thank you very much, Melissa. I look forward to your insight every week. Thank you for your knowledge. Well, that's very kind. Thank you. Thank you. It's extremely nice. Right. Next one. This is from Gerard Crab. Fernando is probably... Oh, it's jumped again. Sorry, just need to get back to this. Where do we get to? Jumped a lot there on my chat thing. Okay, here we go. Fernando's probably happy with a long-term deal. Red Bull will want a solid number 2 and maybe younger driver with Max from 26. Yeah, I think he's just replying to Mike Bartel, isn't he? I mean, Fernando, we all knew that he was going to try and get extra years out of Lawrence Stroll, and he has, so good luck to him and Aston. The irony there, of course, is that they're going to Honda engines in 26, and when Fernando will still be racing there, and we all know the hatred between Fernando and Honda by the end of the whole time at McLaren. Well, I say hatred, it's probably the wrong word, but Fernando was slagging off the Honda engine something rotten, and equally Honda were not impressed by that, and they didn't help him when he wanted to go to India as a result. So it's kind of ironic now that he's back with Honda and he's out there saying, oh, we could go really well with the Honda engine. Okay, and be really nice to Honda this time, Fernando. I hope it goes well for him. I'm a Fernando fan, and anybody gets that wrong, but I think he was out of line in the amount of criticism he gave Honda that year. We all know how bad the Honda engines were, but they didn't need the driver to keep slagging them off. What you needed was someone to get hold of the program and move it to Milton Keynes, which is what happened. And look at overnight, virtually, the Honda engine was brilliant. Portrait Mailer. Peter, glad to pick your mind. Mercedes tyre strategy suffering from dominant car hangover. They value track position over fresh tyres. George always challenges us. Hamilton's always affected. Yeah, I think, maybe. I think they just sort of, because when they don't qualify very well, as they didn't with Lewis, for example, they didn't, just spin the dice, and if everybody's going to go on mediums, well, let's try the hards, see if we can get an advantage that way. It's more that, I think, than anything else, rather than, they're trying to second guess what tyres are going to do what. They just think, well, we might as well try something different to everybody else. I think that's where they're at. But if Mercedes, for example, luck into quite a good setup this weekend, just on the one and only session that you have to set the car up, which is Friday FP1, if Mercedes, just because nobody has much time to, if they're out of the box really to get it right, if Mercedes just have got it more or less right in terms of springs, damping, ride height and everything else, and they qualify quite well, I think you'll see them taking a fairly conservative tyre strategy choice. They'll be thinking, right, we can chance to win this, we'll do what is logical. But if their car is way out of bed, then again, I think so that's when you see teams, and Mercedes specifically, going for a way out their tyre choice just in case it works for them. But it will be, that's what this race will be all about. It's a circuit they don't know very well. It's a circuit that's probably changed quite a lot since all the previous data was accumulated, and they've only got that untimed session on Friday to get the car right as they can get it. So some teams will get it more or less right purely from sim work and anticipation and good judgment. Other teams will be way out of bed, as I say, and that'll be an interesting one. Obviously the team which has the biggest sweet spot, and if they're slightly out, they can massage it back into place, will be in the best shape. And that team, of course, is Red Bull. We know that from the races we've had so far. So in some respects, you could say this format and going back to this circuit throws things wide open for a lot of teams. There's a chance for, say, I don't know, Mercedes to get it magically right and maybe McLaren to get it magically wrong. But for Red Bull to get it wrong, they'd have to be so far out of bed that it was crazy. If Red Bull get it half wrong, they got more chance of getting it back to centre than any other team on the grid. Let's phrase it like that. I think that's really what we're trying to say, or what I'm trying to say. So Roderick Boudwins. Hello again, Mr. Windsor. I heard that Renault might consider selling their spot on the grid to Andretti. What are your thoughts on that? Well, my thoughts are, I think Andretti will, in some form, I think they'll be there in 26. I don't know why, I just feel it. And maybe it's just years of knowing Mario, never giving up. I know it's Michael, but Mario is also very much a driving force in that whole thing. So on that basis, they're still left with the two options of trying to persuade the FIA and the teams with Liberty's endorsement to create a space for an 11th team. And they've seen first time around that isn't going to happen. Maybe, given all the criticism and poor reaction that the FIA and the teams suffered, maybe it's worth having another go at that to change their minds and to see whether or not they can come in as an 11th team. That would be the best option for sure. But equally, why not keep the door open by moving towards a purchase of an existing team? The most logical target would either be Haas or it would be Renault, in my opinion. Renault probably because they have that nice infrastructure in the UK in terms of manufacturing, and they're going through a terrible situation, so they're more likely to sell and want to get out, and the price is possibly more likely to be to reflect that. On the other hand, the Renault deal is a messy one because they've got the whole engine thing and they'd probably want to sell that, and Andretti doesn't want to run Renault engines, and that would be an issue. And equally, you're buying, if a team's not very good, not going well, let's put it that way, then you're buying a lot of those problems. And that's not the number one option. The number one option would still be, if you can, to create your own team. But to keep the door open with the other teams and with the FIA and Liberty, maybe go down the road of talking to a Renault. I say Haas would be an easier deal in a way, because you wouldn't buy the Lola connection, you would just buy the franchise. And Haas might try to sell the Lola connection as part of the franchise, but I think you'd probably be able to disabuse him of that, and you could probably just buy the Haas franchise. And in terms of assets, there's nothing like the same number of assets at Haas as there are at Renault, for example. So that would be the cheapest deal and the best way to get into Formula One. And would Haas then sell to Andretti? If it's decent money and he can get all the money he spent and make a profit and get out, I think he'd probably do it. It need to be that sort of level of money, obviously. No point in doing it for less than that. So, yeah, Carl Givers. Yeah, we had you in the last live feed, Carl. Welcome back. Thank you very much. Hi, Peter. Agog as usual, and hoping my signal holds up. Do you have any... Half agog as usual, you say. Do you have any opinions to offer on the roller coaster career scandals and wobbly man, like re-emergence of Flavio Briatore? Has he re-emerged? Well, hasn't gone away. Did he ever go away? I know Flav quite well, actually. I think he's a good bloke in many ways. I like the way he sort of grunts and doesn't say much, but you kind of know what he's saying without him saying anything, just from the expressions and the arm moves, gestures. He used to go to my gym. We used to bump into one another at my gym on a regular basis, which was always quite funny. And he worked out, quite vociferously, very, very, quite aggressively is the right word, sorry. So yeah, and when you think about it, he okay, a lot of other people can say they discovered Michael Schumacher, but it was Flavio that basically put him on the real Formula One map. I know Eddie Jordan gave me his first chance, but it was Flavio that then, after one race, nicked Michael and gave him 2 world championships. And then Michael just left everything and went to Ferrari, and that was that's quite a big thing if you think about that. And And I was always impressed that Flavio at that point then thought, right, I'll create another Michael and he'll be called Fernando Alonso. And he did the same thing with Fernando, took him out through Minardi, send him to, where was it, Kenya with Webber and that lot, all down there training over the winter, and really looked after Fernando very well and gave Fernando those 2 world championships. So that was impressive, to do that with Michael and then to do that with Fernando. And then he did all those other side deals with Bernie, didn't he? Ligier and all that stuff. And then GP2, GP3, killed everything else in motorsport. But not use that word kill. Got rid of everything else in motorsport. And there he is. Always been a mate of Bernie's, I think. Always. And Bernie probably appreciates the fact that Flavio doesn't talk very much and just gets on with it. And Flavio probably quite likes the way he only has to say a few things to Bernie, and Bernie agrees and goes off and they put a plan together. And he's got his billionaire, he had his billionaire nightclub and clothing and all that stuff. Yeah, re-emergence of Flavio. Yeah, he can always re-emerge. I think he always said, motor racing and Formula One should be much more of a show than it is. And there are too many people that take it too seriously and too technically. And he probably would love the whole Liberty era now, I suspect. And if they're going to make any sort of TV show, they should make it around Flavio. It'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? So, yeah, can I say I'm a fan of Flavio Briatore? I've always got on well with him. And I think he's quite funny, really, I suppose, is the way to phrase it. Another one from Carl. He's talking to Mike. Are you by any chance South African anyway? Get together, you old college boys. Lenka Fiala. Peter, just want to say I love your videos and appreciate your insight. Thank you very much. Cheers from Norway. Thank you. Yeah, Norway, one of my... Well, I love all the Scandinavian countries and wish you well. And odd that we haven't had any Norwegian... Probably going to be the wrong thing to say here. We haven't had any Norwegian drivers, great racing drivers, have we? I'm trying to think. Don't think we have. Denmark, Sweden, Finland, not Norwegian, don't think. Good golfers though. Anyway, portrait mailer again. It's me again. So Leclerc and Ferrari made some mistakes and poor strategy choices in 22. Where did they go wrong from a development standpoint? They were just fast as Red Bull in the beginning. Well, I don't think they were ever as good as Red Bull from the minute the 22 regs came into play. They did a pretty good job compared with most of the teams with the new regs in terms of controlling the bouncing. All credit to Rory Byrne, who was consulting at that point, very good aerodynamicist, ex-Benetton. And they did a pretty good job, but they didn't have a huge sweet spot on the car. I mean, to me, this is the key these days of getting a car that doesn't bounce horrendously and allows the drivers to be able to do what they need with the difficult Pirelli tire situation with the DEG that comes into play. And that's what Red Bull have been able to do from day one. They've always had a downforce advantage that's given them a top speed advantage, what we call efficient aerodynamics. And Ferrari never had that level of efficiency, but they had a much better car than Mercedes and anyone else really. But they were never in the same class as Red Bull. And over the winter, they've done a very good job of sacrificing some top speed, increasing the sweet spot that the drivers have on which to operate. And Bob's your uncle. They're now ahead of McLaren and Mercedes. So good luck to them for that. What they need to do now is keep that level of downforce and drivability and get some top speed back. Then they'll be in Red Bull territory. That's not easy to do, of course. Andrea Olivo says, always happy when I see Peter is live or is alive. Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you. Nice. It's very nice to be here and chatting to you guys. I hope this new time slot, the time slot of this week doesn't put you out. It's actually suiting my life a little bit better to do stuff during the day because I'm getting more and more busy. Excuse me while I just pause for a drink. More and more busy in the evenings with various bits of bob. Work-wise, of course, not talking about night clubbing or anything like that, but of course it comes into it, but yeah, right. John McPh, MCF. Hi, Peter. Always enjoy your insight. Has it been decided where will the next Formula One exhibition be held after Canada? Unfortunately, my holiday in Vienna ended the day before the last one opened. What a shame. Yeah, Vienna goes on for another month, I think. Toronto, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but it's going to be, I better not say the venue, but the next venue after Toronto is a venue that I think everyone will find very easy to get to, very central to the Formula One world, and the exhibition will be on for a good amount of time. We're talking 8 months, I think, if not longer. So yeah, that's all going really well and great. It's so much fun working with the upgrades to the exhibition, if that's the right word, modifications maybe, as we go from venue to venue, because we focus on certain aspects of the Formula One history, tapestry, that is relevant to those areas, and that's always been a very nice thing to do as well. So yeah, thank you for that. And the exhibition, it does still take quite a lot of time. I've just sent off some memorabilia, actually. Better not say what it is, but off to Canada. Toronto, it's going to be great. I can't wait for that, really can't. Matthew Gordon. Hey Peter, Matt from the Australia. G'day mate. Yeah, good on you. Red is the colour. FA, perfect timing on my lunch break. Sorry, red is the colour FA. Okay, perfect timing on my lunch break. Well, that's good to know. Thank you very much. Richard V says, Max will go to Aston for sure and taking Adrian Newey with him. Really? Racing alongside... What, how would that happen? Because hasn't Fernando signed till 26 now? They're not going to get rid of Lance Stroll. He owns the team. So how's that going to happen? Sorry, Richard, I'm not quite sure I understand that. 2 Aston Martin teams, maybe? Daniel Brazil. Hi, Peter. What do you know about doping in Formula One? Was it ever common and is it tested for regularly these days? Yeah, it is tested. They do tests quite regularly. I don't think it was ever common, no. I don't ever remember a driver knowingly, from us outside, using a performance-enhancing drug. I wouldn't say that there've never been any drugs in Formula One. That would probably be the wrong thing to say. Going back a long way, of course. And we all know that Achille Varzi was addicted to morphine. So it has been around. I mean, I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. When I was in the early 2000s, I was the Formula One correspondent for the Sunday Times, which is supposed to be quite a good newspaper. Admittedly, it's a Murdoch paper, so always have to put that in inverted commas. But it was supposed to be quite a serious paper, and I was doing my usual thing and trying to come up with interesting ways of writing about Formula One in a period when Michael was dominating everything, and the sports editor before the British Grand Prix in about 2002 said, oh, well, we're going to do the big drug story then, because that's the only one that's really going to be interesting. Front page of the sports section. I said, what drug story? He said, oh, everybody knows that Formula One, drugs are shipped in and out of Formula One all the time. It's just how they get the drugs in and out of the countries, isn't it? I said, well, I don't know that. I don't know anybody else that's ever spoken about that, and I've never really been aware that's the case. Anyway, on and on. And in the end, they did publish a thing saying, drugs, drama in Formula One, big picture of Michael and the Ferrari team and the lead heading. And I was fired because I didn't want to go along with that story. And the first thing I did was I walked out the door. I rang Max and said, Max, you've got to be ready for this rubbish. It's coming out in the Sunday Times. And ever since, of course, I've never bothered to read a copy of the Sunday Times again on the basis that I can't believe anything they'll ever write. So that's not me being vindictive. I just think, if that's the level they stoop to in order to get readers, then forget it. Rao, Lewis said in today's media event that he didn't care what people think about his move to Ferrari. I guess he's been hearing everyone's opinion. Well, I'm sure he's right there. I mean, why would he care? Oh, they don't think it's a good move. I better change my mind. Of course, and I've said, for what it's worth, I'm on record, have been from day one, saying I don't blame Lewis for 1 second. I think I think he'll love his life there. I think he'll enjoy it, and I think he'll go very well. And I think if the car's got a half reasonable sweet spot, I think you'll see Lewis as quick as he's ever been at any stage of his career. So I'm looking forward to seeing him in that car. Having said that, I don't think Ferrari need Lewis, as I've said earlier in this live stream. I think they need a championship winning car. And I think with Charles, if they had a championship winning car, they could do it. And especially if they had Carlos Sainz in the other car, he could even win a championship, with a few breaks. He could beat Charles over a season, I think, now, the way he's driving. Really good. But they've signed Lewis, so good luck to Lewis. Can't blame him for that at all. Another super chat. Thank you very much, Real Race Talk. This is... does this ground effect era expose a weakness in Lewis's driving style where he needs a perfect rear end? That's an interesting question. I don't think he needs a perfect rear end. I think he needs a rear end that he can predict and feel in the way that you can with a normal racing car. I mean, obviously the Mercedes has a thing where it feels good and then there's just a sudden breakaway. And it's not just Lewis that's feeling that, it's George as well. And George sometimes gets more out of the car. But I think, does it expose a weakness in Lewis's driving style? What I think it does is expose a time of Lewis's career when he doesn't need to be absolutely flat out if the back end is going to be skittish at anything above 150 miles an hour. But skittish, by which I mean sudden breakaway with no warning, snap oversteer. Why does he need to do that? With 7 world championships. But having said that, I don't think he would be any slower than he's ever been, I think he'd be just as quick as he's ever been, if the car was half reasonable and predictable, and he can still hold a slide at 150 miles an hour, 160 miles an hour, for sure. Let's hope in a way that the Mercedes is quite good in China and they've got the setup more or less right, because it'll be interesting to see Lewis through turn 7 if it is a bit oversteery through there. And I think you'll be surprised at how good he still is. So I don't think he's ever had a weakness of that area in the way Sebastian Vettel did, for example, when he got blown away by Daniel Ricciardo at Red Bull in that last year when they took away all the downforce from the back or lost grip at the back. But Lewis, at this point, as I say, he doesn't need to stretch the envelope to the absolute edge for 5th place or 6th place. I get that. And I think it'd be quite difficult for Lewis to explain that to people in a press conference or something, because he can always be misquoted and you can always, have people saying, oh, Lewis is over the hill. So that's why he doesn't talk about it probably. But I think that's the situation. And I think he's going to Ferrari hoping that he's going to have a reasonable sweet spot that he can feel confident. The sweet spot he had in the Mercedes on Friday in Suzuka when he loved it and he was driving beautifully, You saw him using the back end perfectly there, really. Okay. Nicholas Tate. Hi, Peter. Big fan from San Diego. Hi, Nicholas. Thank you for coming in, joining us. Would love your thoughts on Lance Stroll? He's holding up valuable real estate for other drivers trying to join. Also, Aston Martin investors concerned about him too. Well, that's a bit rich, because if it wasn't for Lance, there wouldn't be any Aston Martin for the investors to invest their money in, would there? It's his team. It's his dad's team. But without Lance wanting to be a racing driver, his dad wouldn't have done this. So the whole thing centers around Lance Stroll. So for the Aston Martin investors to say, we're worried about his performance. If I was Lance Stroll, I would say, well, I'm worried about your input. Yeah, go away and keep your mouth shut. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have the team in the first place. So it's a little bit like Lewis. You can't blame Lewis for going to Ferrari. You can't really blame Lance Stroll for wanting to be a Formula One driver and having a dad who's clever enough and rich enough to be able to go and buy you a team to enable you to be a Formula One driver. And look what's happening. As a result of creating that team, he's given a lot of very good people jobs, and he's given Fernando Alonso an extended life in Formula One, and he's got Honda engines to sort of come into Formula One yet again. He's got a new factory, which Silverstone love, because they're spending lots of money buying land and creating that at Silverstone. I mean, they've actually, I'm not a Lawrence Stroll fan, but in terms of his demeanour and the way he carries on, but in terms of the overall picture, I think you'd have to be crazy not to say that the Strolls haven't brought quite a lot to Formula One to the benefit of a lot of motor racing people. And part of that is Lance Stroll. I mean, it's not as if they hired the driver on merit. We know that. They hired him because he's the son of Lawrence. That's why he's doing it. And maybe he would have got some sort of drive on merit at some point because he was very good at karting, very good in Formula 3. He went through all the correct feeder things, and except F2. And so there he is. And I think Fernando Alonso will say, that's why he's so nice to Lance. If it wasn't for Lance, he wouldn't be racing now probably. So he probably loves it all. And actually, it behoves Fernando, and I think this is why he's done this. He's always out there, on the radio saying, "Oh, tell Lance this, and I'm not doing that, and I'm happy to, does Lance need to part, whatever." He's always been Mr. Nice Guy with Lance, and that's because he knows that so long as the Strolls are happy, he's got a drive and a good team, and the team, in theory, can get better, and he can maybe win some Grand Prix again. And so it behoves him to get the best from Lance Stroll. And so nobody should judge Lance Stroll by any standards that we normally judge drivers by, because he's out there putting a team together. And you think of, George Eaton, another really wealthy Canadian, came in and just sort of bought a drive at BRM and then disappeared. And Lance could have done that, I guess, and they kind of did that at Williams, didn't they? And then they went off and did this. So, McLaren F1 race. Rumour has it that Bottas will be driving his bicycle this weekend as the wheels are easier to change. Yeah, well, they all make mistakes. Believe me, I've been there. Nick Bosman, hello Peter. Do you think that Otmar would have seen Alpine do better in 24, probably 25? Yeah, I do. I really do. I think Otmar is just one of several good people that Alpine fired, and it was to their detriment, really. A lot of people have their own opinions, but that's my opinion, and I think Otmar's got a lot of racing road dust on him. He understands it. He knows he's got a good feel for good engineers in other teams and how to get them to join Alpine and working through their contracts, and he does a good job like that, and I don't think the current lot have any feel for that at all. James S. Hi Peter, do you think 25 could see a repeat of the 21 rivalry between Max and Lewis? No. I don't think so, no, because that's when Mercedes were on occasions as quick, if not quicker, than Red Bull. Can't see that happening in 25 at all. Maybe Ferrari might be even nearer in 25, and we might see what would we see? We'd see Max against probably Charles, so maybe Lewis. Oh, sorry, that's what you're getting at, isn't it? Ferrari, that good. But the difference is, of course, that Lewis has got to beat Charles. And I just don't believe he'll walk over Charles Leclerc. So if the Ferrari is close enough to the Red Bull for it to be reviving memories of 2021 Red Bull Mercedes, Lewis has got to dominate Ferrari in the way he dominated Mercedes with Valtteri Bottas in the other car, and that isn't going to happen. So it's going to be, if Ferrari are much closer and on occasions as quick, it's going to be Max v Charles and Lewis with a bit of Perez thrown in. Or maybe Carlos Sainz if they replace him, but I doubt they will. Nick Bosman, again, I feel like Rossi deliberately destabilising the team, and Bruno, seemingly after Otmar's job, did permanent damage to Alpine structure. Yeah, well, you said it better than I think, Nick, and it's very sad. Very sad that, isn't it? Because Renault have such a good history, or had such a good history of doing it more or less correctly. Even when they had their own team, they did it pretty well. And, certainly winning Grand Prix. Okay, they didn't win the World Championship, but they weren't far away. And then they went as an engine supplier, did a really good job. And ever since they came back, this whole Alpine thing has just never worked, has it? Not really. The whole thing's wrong. Should be Renault yellow, in my opinion, anyway. What's the connection of Alpine with Formula One anyway? Alpine were a sports car team, Le Mans. We loved those. But Renault was the history. Renault was the heritage. Renault was the yellow and black, and Jean-Pierre Jabouille and Eddie Cheever and Alan Prost and René Arnoux, and they were great times. Patrick Tambay, Derek Warwick. That's the team they should have. That's the heritage they should have been living upon, and they didn't. They went the weird Alpine way. I know they're trying to push that Alpine road car, but plenty of Renaults they could have pushed as well. So nothing about it feels right to me, even today. Augusto. Hi Peter, could you talk a bit about tyre history in Formula 1? Bridgestone v Michelin Wars, introduction of Pirellis and the initial drama in 13 with Deg, Merck, pre-Monaco, Silverstone. Thanks for, can't see the last bit. They can go on forever about that, but whenever we had a tyre war, in other words, more than one tyre company in Formula 1, the tyres were pretty good. and there was a lot of room in which to play in terms of how you could run the tyre in qualifying and the racing, and there was a wide variety of different compounds and approaches to the race, and it was fabulous. And there was a lot of tyre testing, which was just as good. So the teams got paid to do the mileage testing tyres, but at the same time, of course, they were developing chassis and engines, so it worked well for everybody. Then it all went wrong when Bridgestone were allied very closely to Bernie and Max, in that they spent quite a lot of money on circuit signage and hospitality, whereas Michelin were more technically focused and spent more of their budget on technology. And so they were never flavour of the month in Formula One. And when that problem arose at Indy in 2005, they were hung out to dry, basically. The Formula One could have done a better job of looking after the Michelin teams, putting in a chicane at the last minute, whatever they had to do. But they didn't. They just hung them out to dry. And a year later, now being accused by Jean Todt and Ross Brawn for cheating, Michelin withdrew from Formula One, basically saying we'll never come back to Formula One again. Very badly treated and very short-sighted by Formula One, I think, because such a great company should not be treated that way, given Michelin's history in the sport, going right back to the 1900s. So Michelin were out. That left Bridgestone in a monopoly. And they spent a lot of money in those years of monopoly, 2 or 3 years. And then they just sort of, wow, this is a massive amount of money, not a lot of return. We're not beating anybody. Occasionally get the odd bit of bad publicity when something goes wrong with a tyre. We're out of here. And for a while, there was nobody to take their place. And Bernie was sort of threatening to buy Avon tyres or another tyre company like that, and he would supply the tyres himself. And they, oh no, can't do that. So eventually he put the Pirelli deal together on the basis that Formula One would need to make it quite easy for Pirelli not to have to spend a fortune on technology. And the way to do that was to divide the race into 2 halves and have a mandatory pit stop, which is where we're at today still. And it's the technology is not great because it doesn't need to be. It's a monopoly tyre supplier. What we need are tyres that just make the racing interesting and safe. And Pirelli overall do a very, very good job, I think, for that. You can't blame them for taking the approach they do, because they too want to spend a lot of money on marketing and publicity and signage and everything else, which is not cheap. So we're there, and yes, you have these ups and downs with loads and stresses that Pirelli perhaps underestimate, but they very quickly, generally speaking, react to that. And when you think about the loads that are going through the tyres now, and the quantum leap in performance of the cars with ground effect and the bigger wheels, the rims, they've done an amazingly good job, I think, overall. So that's where we're at. Would we love to see another tyre company and a tyre war in Formula One again? Absolutely. Will it happen? Almost certainly not, because it's so expensive and there's so much downside for coming in as the other tyre supplier. A, you can get beaten, and B, there's always the lack of publicity when things go well, but headline news if there's a tyre blowout and it hurts you. So I really miss Goodyear, I miss Michelin, I miss Bridgestone, and I enjoy Pirelli. I've always enjoyed all the tyre companies. Pirelli have had a long history in Formula One. You have Juan Manuel Fangio, Alberto Ascari, before that, Ferrari, obviously. So at least they got that as well. And the Pirelli calendar. So there's a lot of great things about Pirelli. They're a very artistic company in many ways. Their graphics are great, and they do a very good job. And their people are good. They're quite open in the way they talk about performance as well. The sad thing is, from my perspective, that I used to know all the Goodyear race engineers by name, and I could walk up to, I don't know, the Ferrari race engineer or the Lotus race engineer and say, oh, what happened with Mario today? Why was he slow? And he would know everything. And he would just, oh, yeah, well, he had a problem here. But you can't do any of that today. And partly because the Pirelli guys don't even know themselves. The teams keep so much information to themselves because they just don't want it going out. But so far as their data is concerned, Pirelli are pretty open by today's standards, I think. So it's very nice. I think there's another super chat here. Let's have a look. F1 Henzi. No question. Just wishing all a nice day and best wishes. Thanks a lot, Peter. Born in 2000. Thanks to you, I can learn about what I missed. Oh, thank you very much. Nice, very nice letter. Thank you. Or message, sorry. Sizwi Hadebi. Sorry, poor pronunciation. Siz Hadebi. Hi, Peter. Thanks for your wonderful content as always. Thank you. What do you make of Bruno Famin blaming the previous management for Alpine's bad car this year? Well, I put that sort of comment in the same context as a team principal when he joins a new team, always saying, don't expect changes overnight. It's going to take a year, 2 years, 3 years before I can get this team performing well. They always say that, don't they? Well, that's one cliche. The second cliche is always when a team gets beaten at any given weekend, like Mercedes and Suzuka, we kind of expected this was going to happen. As if that's a comfortable explanation for it all and they can all go to bed sleeping well that night. And the third one is, it's not our fault. It's the previous lot. It's all them. Can't be me. Well, I think in that one comment, you can see why they're not doing very well, can't you? Daniel, Brazil. Hi, Peter. What do you know about... we've done that one. There we go. Rao, how would, hypothetically speaking, Nigel and Carlos Reutemann fare as teammates? Oosh. Well, both my drivers. Well, I wouldn't, not that I got any hair left at all, but if I did have any left, that would certainly go if those two were racing against one another. But I always made sure they were good mates, actually. And this goes back to 1979, when Nigel was in his Unipart Formula 3 season with a Dolomite dog engine, very slow, but driving the skin off it and getting the odd P5, P6 in Dave Price's team. Good that Dave gave him that opportunity. But me watching it, thinking how brilliant Nigel was, as I just did. I just loved the way he drove and the way he was and how well he drove it. And Brett Riley in the other car did a pretty good job as well. But then I also had this other plan going on, which was trying to get Nigel into Formula One, obviously. And I got him what did we do? I got him a couple of drives in the BMW County Saloon thing. And I was sort of trying to do something with Ralt for 1980, testing the F2 car. But I'd also managed to get my friend Peter Collins in at Lotus as assistant team manager. And that was great because he was one of my best buddies. And very quickly I told Peter about Nigel and how good he was. And so Peter started mentioning this to Colin Chapman, this young Englishman, Nigel Mansell, he's a great talent. And of course it went in one ear and out the other. But nonetheless, the name was somewhere sticking, I suppose, in his brain. 79 British Grand Prix, Carlos was driving for Lotus. I did that deal as well. And I managed I said, Carlos, do you reckon you could come down to the chicane to watch the Formula 3 race and bring Colin with you? Because it would be mega for Nigel if we could have you two watching him. And Carlos did, bless him. He said, no problem. And the next thing I knew, I'm standing there at the Woodcote chicane, which was a quick chicane then, with Carlos and Colin. And I'm saying, there he is, it's that guy there. And Carlos was, very, very good turning. Incredible short corner. Very good driver, Colin. And then at the end of the year, we got Nigel in the Lotus 79 test at Ricard. Brilliant. So, Carlos always knew that I was very close to Nigel, and he always used to ask how he was getting on. And then, of course, when Nigel did make Formula One in 1980, they did spend a bit of time. We used to hang out a bit together, all three of us. It was quite funny. It was pretty different, Nigel and Carlos, but Nigel knew about my relationship with Carlos, so he was always very nice to Carlos. And equally, Carlos thought Nigel quite early on was very quick. So, and he knew what Nigel was going through at Lotus, didn't he? Because he'd been there. Carlos at that point, of course, was at Williams. So yeah, it was a very nice time, actually. And the other guy Nigel was close to, and I guess it's because I was as well, was Gilles, because I was very close friends with Gilles. And so I told Gilles about Nigel. And so Gilles and Nigel became quite good friends. And Gilles immediately realized that that Nigel was quite quick and liked him as a result. And Nigel knew how quick Gilles was. And so they became good mates. I'd say Carlos and Gilles, in that stage, those very early years, were the best two mates Nigel had in Formula One. Good. Thank you for that question. MIE1 Joss. Me1 Joss. Who do you think will be the podium? 1, 2, 3 in China. Both sprint. I can't answer questions like that. I mean, I don't want to give the boring answer. So whenever anybody asks me that, I always try to think, well, I'm not going to say what everybody else says, because what's the point? I'm going to give Mercedes the benefit of the doubt and think that they might just suddenly luck into having a good car this weekend, because there's not much time to get it wrong, if you see what I mean. If they have got the setup more or less right, there's only 1 hour in which everybody else can get it more or less right. So I'm going to give you, as I said, I think Charles will go well, because he's got 2 goes at qualifying. He may not qualify that well for the first one, but he should get it right for qualifying for the Grand Prix, shouldn't he? So I'd put Charles, I don't know. I mean, Max not to win these, he's got to have an engine blow up or some hydraulic drama or something, isn't he? So let's put Max ahead, number 1 in both. But I'd put a Mercedes in the top 3 in the sprint, and I'd put Charles P2 in the Grand Prix. Don't ask me for any more detail than that. That's enough, isn't it? My brain's not big enough to think beyond that. I suppose a Carlos Sainz will probably go very well in the sprint, I guess. So you could put Max, Sainz, and maybe Lewis. It'd be nice if Lewis was quicker than George this weekend, wouldn't it? No reason why it shouldn't be. It's a good circuit. But it's only if the Mercedes is good. If the Mercedes is difficult, George will probably do it again. And McLaren, I don't know. It depends how quick they are on the straight. Should be there. Quentin Hirschfeld. Hi, Peter. I wanted to know, how did Lewis Hamilton keep his car so well balanced, very smooth transition, while simultaneously being a late breaker? Well, because he's not that late. He's not as late as George. He's not a late breaker. He's never put a premium on being a late breaker. He's put a premium on being a correct breaker and braking at the right cadence for the pace of the car, what he wants the car to do next, and the road surface that he's on, whether there's a slight bump anywhere or an undulation that may affect the ability of the car to sit square on the road. And he has an unbelievable feel for that. And sometimes that adds up to being a late breaker, because he appears to get the car stopped very quickly, and because of that he can do that nearer to the corner than some others. But his premium as he sets out is not to brake as late as possible. It's to brake at the right rate and the right way in order to get the turn in that he needs to the transition point. That's what Lewis has always been all about. So it does make me laugh when people say, oh, he's got very wide corners. I mean, racing line is not the same as managing the dynamic weight. It's 2 different things. And so you get the Anthony Davidsons and a couple of other people saying, oh, Lewis has got, he's going in wider than Max at some places at Suzuka. But, I guarantee if Lewis is in a good car with good balance and good grip and good top speed and a nice big sweet spot in which to manage everything, I guarantee he could do almost the same lap time using wide approach to the corner and coming in a bit earlier. I guarantee it. Because even if you're doing it widely, going on a wide approach, you've still got to manage perfectly the moment at which you are loading up the car and how you're loading up the steering. And that's what he does. The slightly quicker way, for sure, is the shorter corner and the mid-corner rotation that Max is able to do constantly. But he'd be very near that with the wide approach. In fact, he'd be almost there. As Ayrton was always wide approach. It's not that the guys that have these wide approaches like Jenson Button, different sort of driver, because they do brake in a straight line and go in wide, or Carlos Sainz, but not when Lewis does it. When Lewis is doing it, he's still got this incredible feel and trade-off between brake and throttle. And I'm 100% convinced that if you said to Lewis, okay, do a lap of Silverstone now, turning in late, he could do it. And then you say, okay, do your normal lap now, and he would do that. And I don't think there'd be much between them, because his balance of the dynamic weights is so good. And that's what I think a lot of people don't get. They just assume it's all about line. It's not about line. It's about balancing weights and trading loads, lateral against other loads, deceleration, acceleration. That's what it's all about, in a perfectly harmonious way. Rasmus Brecki. Hey Peter, do you have any memories of Michele Alboreto? I was too young to see him in Formula 1, but I remember him racing Audi sports cars until the accident in 2001. Yeah, a lot of memories of Michele. Got on very well with him. He actually gazumped Rob Wilson at Tyrrell. If it wasn't for Michele, with a bit of money from Gugi Zanon, who was Frank Williams' mate, Count Zanon, who sponsored Lella Lombardi and bought Cosworth engines for Ronnie Peterson to take to Lotus. That's how Ronnie got the Lotus drive. Very good man, Count Zanon, lived in Cap Ferrat, and he was also very good to Michele Alboreto and helped Michele get into Formula 1. So Rob Wilson didn't get his Tyrrell drive, but Michele made good use of every opportunity he was given. A lovely guy, very kind, very polite, not stupid at all, very sensitive to racing things, to the setup of the car and the way it should go, and one of the most perfect gear changes I ever heard in Formula 1, upshifts and downshift. He was absolutely perfect. I mean, I'm a Carlos Reutemann fan, but he was better than Carlos. I would say he was the best gear changer I ever heard in terms of a manual shift. Everything was spot on. It was just like a knife through butter with Michele. That was one thing. The other thing was when I was lucky enough to befriend Sting in, what was it, 80, 86, 87, around there. We were testing at Monza, and I was at Williams, and I was staying in quite an old hotel in Milano, and Sting was in the bar, and we were chatting away, and he expressed an interest in Formula 1 and wanting to see what it was all about. And he was amazed that we were there testing at Monza just when he was in concert there. So the next morning, bright and early, he was in the lobby ready to go, and we drove out to the track, and I spent the day with him at Monza, which some of my sponsorship guests really enjoyed, I got to tell you. But there he was on the pit wall with a stopwatch. He was really into it all. Anyway, one of the guys I introduced him to was Michele, and I then said, how about taking him for a lap in the lunch break? And he did. Michele was in some sort of 3:48, I think, and took Sting for a few laps around the circuit. So good man. Yeah, a lot of time for Michele. Really polished pro. Really good. Toxa 1201 LS. Just reading Gunter's book about the 22 season. What a ride Haas Formula 1 had. Unbelievable. US F1 got a shout too. Well, I'm glad we did. As I say, when I was trying to put that US F1 team together, which I still think would have been a great team, I spent quite a lot of time at the old Summit coffee shop with Gunter. Good man. Carbon guy. I think we even did get him to do some carbon work for us, but we were certainly, it was only just right at the beginning, he was going to do a lot of it. So yeah, good. Wish him well. Sam Bellantoni. They will just get dancing girls, Pete. What's that all about? Sounds like a good thing, but I'm not quite sure what it's in response to, because there's a bit of a delay here. Reflexes between me saying something and coming up in chat seems to be about 10 minutes or whatever. Daniel Brazil. Hi, Peter. What do you know about doping? Oh, we've done that one. McLaren F1 race. I'm a night owl, LOL. So this is about, what time zone you're in. So I'll watch it. Sprint quali, not though. That's my commute to work time. Oh, okay. He's going to watch a lot of it, but he's not going to watch sprint quali. Depends what part of the world you're in. Visual Ghoul. Crofty just asked in the driver's press conference to Alonso if he's worried Honda will give him a GP2 engine. They don't do GP2 engines. I know where he's coming from. Are they going to get, they're going to get their own back at Fernando for everything the way he slagged them off. But probably find, as with all these companies, Audi, everyone, that is completely new management at Honda since even the Fernando days. So last Fernando days. So yeah, that's not going to happen, I don't think. But hiring. Hello, Peter. How are we going on when we have only one test run? You talk about we've only had one test in Formula 1. Yeah, it's not good, is it? That would be the great thing if we did have two tyre companies. As I say, we go back to tyre testing. It was a brilliant thing. I mean, Jackie Stewart could never believe it when he was at Tyrrell and they had this big contract with Dunlop. And this is going back to 68, 69. And every lap they did, they got 100 quid or something. So Jackie'd be out there all day driving around. Brilliant. And then Goodyear came in and doubled it all. I mean, Goodyear basically sponsored Dan Gurney's Eagle in '67. If it wasn't for Goodyear, I don't think I'm wrong here. I don't think that project would have happened at all. That's how impressive and intensive the tyre company involvement was in Formula One, to the point where, having won the Belgian Grand Prix in '67 and looked very good throughout the year, when Goodyear said to Dan, okay, that's brilliant, now we want you to win the Indy 500 with us and the Eagle, and we want you to focus on that, Dan did. He still dabbled in Formula One, and he did a bit of racing for McLaren and so forth, but his focus then was on Indy, because that's what Goodyear told him to do. The tyre companies, Leo Mel, he was a major player in Formula One. He could affect the careers of drivers and certainly the way teams performed. Quite right too. Very important thing, tyres. Otimio Parker, I'm here. Good. Glad you are. Lou Segoya, Quebec says hi. Yeah, I say bye. Hi, another great love of mine. Dennis Melvin, so long, Mr. Hamilton. Okay, I think that's a compliment to Lewis. Done that one again. All these questions about that same one. You try and ask the same question. Sorry, try and ask the question only once. Okay, McLaren F1 race. The Zoe grandstand was sold out in 4 minutes. Yep, good. Well, they've got a Chinese driver, haven't they? So it should be. I mean, I just hope it's a proper crowd. 250,000. And I'm not being over the top there, because I think it was 230,000 in Japan, wasn't it? So it's just that they've always been 23 before. That's all. Radio shows around Shanghai should be mandatory for the champions for promotion. Well, not only radio, but TV and pro-am kart race meetings for charity. The whole thing should be mega promoted over the winter, I think. So, Ludro Alvarado. Hi, Peter. Is it possible that the reason this weekend is a sprint is because they would like to have more rubber on the track in a shorter period of time? Or is there a sprint just for the hype? I don't think it's the rubber thing, because in terms of percentage, how much more rubber goes down because it's a sprint rather than an FP2 stroke FP3? And you could argue that FP3 more rubber goes down because they all do long fuel runs, and that puts a lot of rubber down. I don't think that came into it. I think it's more, we've got to have a sprint, and China's been lagging in terms of the spectator thing. Let's if they're going to come back on the calendar, we'll make that the first of the sprint weekends, because we think it's a great thing. So, yeah. Hi Peter. Andretti Formula One seems to be moving full speed ahead regardless of Formula One's rejected bid. Do you think Andretti is banking on a change of heart by Formula One? Can Andretti hold all together for 4 years? Well, as I said earlier, I've got this feeling that they will be in, and I think they'll probably, if they're well advised, I think they will try both options just to keep all the balls in the air. The number one option for them, I would imagine, is definitely to do their own team and be be the new team and 11th team on the grid. But in order to keep that ball open, and magically, hopefully, the teams and the FIA will agree to that for 26. But to keep that open, that door, they need to go down the path of being seen to be potentially buying an existing team. The most likely being Renault, probably, because they're not going very well, and the price will probably reflect that. The complication is the whole engine thing from Renault's point of view, what they would then do with that, because I can't imagine Andretti would want to buy that because he's got his Cadillac deal, and equally Haas maybe. But for Haas to sell to an American team, maybe he wouldn't want to do that. So here we go. Paul Gilbert. Germans don't work on Sunday. This is in response to the pictures I put up about the Audi car park being completely empty. But the point was that those pictures were taken on a Saturday, so they don't work on Saturdays either, I can tell you that. Chris McClellan. Hi, Peter from New Zealand. Question for you about your love of short corners. Point 1. Why do you seem to ignore the variable of velocity with regards to lap time? Longer corner drivers, yes, they're using more track. And what's the second part? Well, there isn't a second part. I'm not quite sure. Why do I ignore the variable of velocity? The velocity is... What is velocity? I used to know that. Let me have a look. It's force versus something, isn't it? I'll just look this up, see what comes up on Google. What is velocity? Quantity that designates how fast and in what direction a point is moving. Do I ignore that? I don't think I do I? Why do I ignore the variable of velocity with regards to lap time? The variable of velocity. I mean, velocity is affected by variables, but it's not a variable in itself, is it? Anyway, longer corners use more track, but more importantly, if you have perfect use of the short corner technique, perfect use, and that's almost impossible to achieve, but if you're somewhere near that, you're extending the straight, and both ends, you're extending the straight under braking, so you can actually be on the power for a little bit longer, and equally you're extending the straight for acceleration, so you got the car straighter sooner. And that is what it's all about. The corners divide the straights. It's all about being as quick as possible on the straights. It's not about being as quick as possible on the corners. And I think that's what a lot of people also don't appreciate. So that's why short corner driving is so effective. Whereas you can have a much higher minimum speed if you go in wider and get on the power sooner. You can have it's on a 90 degree corner, sorry. You can have a higher minimum speed, but you won't necessarily be as quick as somebody who's gone in quicker, come down to a relatively slow rotation at exactly the right moment, then got on the power sooner. If you measure what that car then is doing 100 meters out of the corner, it's going faster than the car that's got the higher minimum speed. So that's not a direct answer to your question, because I'm a bit puzzled by it. I don't really understand, because I don't see velocity as a variable. So I'm slightly confused. NC Paddock. Hi, Peter. Oh, we've seen that one. Okay, that was when I came up earlier. I found that super chat. Okay, next one. Nick Bosman. Another question. Is Masayuki Minagawa the real deal, or did he just hit the bullseye once in 2009? I read that he's going to Aston. I think he is the real deal, because he's clever enough to have thought about the whole double diffuser situation, and Braun were clever enough to listen to him and watch what he was doing and to adopt it. Having said that, Adrian Newey always has said to me that he had the same thought, and when he went to Charlie in back end of 2008, Charlie said, don't do it, it won't be allowed. And yet they were given the nod on the Braun, so that's always been a bit of a mystery. Not really, but that's always should be borne in mind. And Williams also had it, didn't they? Williams had a double diffuser as well, didn't do as well with it. So he is obviously very, very good, and why not use somebody with that sort of talent? Yeah, I think he's very good. Mohammed Mia, do you think Yuki can force himself into Red Bull next season? No, I think if Red Bull are going to make any change, it would be to swap Perez for Sainz. But I can't see how they would swap Perez for Yuki. As much as Yuki deserves to stay in Formula One, hopefully with a good team, it's his only chance is to stay really, I think, where he is with Red Bull money, even if they're going to Ford, for 26. Difficult for Yuki, because he, a bit like Carlos Sainz, he deserves more than he's appears to have on paper at the moment in terms of his future. Daniel Brazil, with doping, we've done that one. Okay, here's the second part of Chris McLennan. But they're obviously doing them at a velocity which negates that extra distance in order to get the same lap time as short corner drivers. It's simple mathematics, distance and velocity gives time. But they're obviously doing that at a velocity which negates that extra distance. in order to get the same lap time. But how do you know they're doing the same lap time? And anyway, as I've said before, it's not about line, it's about balancing the dynamic weights. And so I've always said that the most efficient way is the one I've just described, of doing that mid-corner transition, which is quite relatively slow mid-corner speed, but extending the straights. It's all about extending the straights into and out of the corner. And so, yes, along the way, maybe that lap is slightly less ground, but that's not the key. You can still have all the feel and touch you need in order to perfectly execute the short corner and apply that to a longer approach and a wider approach to the corner. And there'll be very little in it. Very little in it. It's all about balancing the weight perfectly. That's much more important than the difference in the amount of ground that you're covering. And so, as I said before, if you ask Max Verstappen to drive a lap using longer approaches to the corner and maybe higher minimum speeds, he could be within a tenth or two of what he could do using his own system. But his own system, in other words, the short corner thing, has more margin for error, because he's not relying on having to brake as late as he possibly can and load the car up perfectly. He can always massage the car as he's coming into the corner, trading steering load against brake pedal. He's got much more of a palette in which to play when he's doing the short corner thing. But it's not to say that if you've got Ayrton Senna out there executing longer corners, that it isn't going to be as quick. Senna had the touch and the feel and the ability to do what Max does on short corners. It's just that he never did it. It just didn't feel natural to him, in the same way that he always blipped the throttle. It felt natural to him. Every driver's slightly different. But to repeat the point yet again, it's not about line. It's about managing the dynamic weights. And don't forget that word dynamic. It means they're constantly moving all the time. Quentin Hirschfeld. Peter, in your opinion, what went wrong for Fisichella at Renault? I believe he was superb when he was driving for Jordan, Benetton and Sauber with some of his world performances. I thought he did all right at Renault. What went wrong when he went to Ferrari would be more the thing, because he was, he had that chance. It didn't really work for him, did it? But when he was at Benetton, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think he out-qualified Jenson Button 13-3, 16. If it was a 16 race championship, it was like 13-3. And if you consider that Jenson Button was good enough to win several Grand Prix and to beat Lewis Hamilton in the same car and the same team in those Grand Prix wins, or some of those Grand Prix wins, then that makes Fisichella pretty good, doesn't it? Yeah, by that standard. I always felt Renault got the best from him, actually. I think Jarno Trulli had more difficulty with Flavio and all that, but I think Fisichella, they maximised his talent, really. I thought he always looked good there. Certainly blew Jensen away. David Okanta. Hey, Peter, do you think the sprint race is here for good? I think it's ruining Formula One as a product. Well, David, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm not a sprint fan. I'm not a DRS fan. I'm not an artificial racing fan. I like things to be natural and pure because I'm a purist. So, but the way it's going, I'm kind of relieved there's only 6 races with a sprint. I feared there would be like 12 or something. So I guess it is here to stay, isn't it? Shame. A bit like speed bumps and DRS. There you go. Marco Daly says, Adrian was in Italy to drive sports cars in Mugello. Well, there you go. Sounds like the Adrian I know and love. I knew there'd be a good reason for it. And he probably loved the idea that everybody thought he was going to Ferrari as well. Right. Airflow to the turbo. Here's a good one. Thank you very much for that. Super chat. Hi Peter, what's the weight situation with the 26 cars? Heavier or lighter? Seems to be lots of confusion, disagreement. Also, is bringing back V8s with clean biofuel a total pipe dream or possible? I don't think... Well, I mean, all I can report is that my understanding of the 26 rules is that they are bringing forward the desire to make the cars lighter, smaller and more nimble. Whether they do that, the jury's completely out, bearing in mind we're going to 50% electrification, and the whole battery issue is something that's a completely movable feast, and at the moment is based on quite heavy, large masses. So how they would actually reduce weight and make the cars lighter and more nimble, your guess is as good as mine, bearing in mind that in addition to the battery requirement, they also inevitably, the cars tend to put on weight every year due to safety improvements, the roll hoop this year, for example, and other things. So the cars naturally tend to get heavier every year because of all the safety stuff in there. And you've got this whole electrification thing. But you have got this move to want to make the cars smaller and lighter. And there's no group of people in the world better than Formula One engineers to look at a problem and try to solve it, either collectively or individually. And the battery one will be a fascinating one, because maybe Formula One's approach to battery development will be so accelerated and so advanced that it'll actually pave the way massively into huge improvements in the automotive industry anyway. That's what I'm hoping. I may be wrong, but I love to see the cars smaller and lighter and more nimble. I've got my doubts whether they'll pull that off. You know, don't forget the 22 cars, originally 21 cars, but they were 22 due to COVID. Well, the whole regulation in which we're racing at the moment is purely to make it easier to overtake the car in front, less turbulence coming out from the car in front and less effect when you're following that car with the front wing design. And after about 8 months, the bouncing and the porpoising in 22 was so bad that they changed the regulations and what you could do with ride heights and everything else and curves here and so forth, that the cars now have much less bouncing but more turbulence, and it's actually quite difficult to overtake with them again. So the whole premises of the 22 car is kind of a big question mark because of the changes they had to make in order to make the cars just basically drivable. And it could well be the same with the 26 cars, that they've got this well-meaning intention of trying to make the cars lighter and more agile, but when it gets down to it, they'll be the same size, probably even heavier. Eddie Congress, what happened to Albon signing some type of agreement with Red Bull? You were really the only person reporting that. Do you think? Yeah, I heard that he had been, all I said was he'd been offered that Red Bull deal. Now, I don't know what the deal was. It may well have been, well, test for a year and then we'll have you under contract for 3 years, or we'd like to have you back, maybe option on you driving in the other team, Visa. But I heard that, and from a very, very reliable source. So I've got no doubt to think that that's not the case, and whether or not he's accepted it, we'll have to find out. But it's all driven by the tie end of the Red Bull ownership. So I stand by that. I don't stand by it. I just said, in passing with a conversation with a friend on the phone, he said, "Oh yeah, no, I think Alex has definitely been offered that deal." So, but I don't know. Well, we'll see. Well, let's just wait and see. I mean, he hasn't driven that well this year, has he? He looks pretty stressed out, and that whole business in Melbourne was a bit unsatisfactory. John Adams Jr., love your passion for motorsport, Peter. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been tested a few times, John, but over the years, still lots of bits of it that I love and I find fascinating. I'm looking forward, as I say, to turn 7 in Shanghai. That's what I'm looking forward to seeing. I just hope they have decent camera angles there, nice and low, so you can see them as they come over the brow into 7. That's what I want to see. Yeah. Fat chance of that happening. Aaron Lee, in a practice run, long run, what limit are the drivers driving to? Practice stints seem to be shorter than race stints, so they're told to target a specific time. No, they do enough laps to be able to simulate what was going to happen with tyre deg based on what's happened over the 4 or 5 laps. But you see, when Max does a proper run, it's usually, 13, 14 laps. It's quite long, and that's because they're organised enough to do that. When McLaren do it, they tend to not run full loads of fuel, so they're having to extrapolate what would have happened if they had more weight in the car. Ferrari are being a little bit more disciplined about it, but if you look at the way Red Bull do it, they tend to run right up until the cliff and the deg cliff. Not at all circuits, depends on what compound range Pirelli have brought, but you can do quite a lot on those FP3, and well, here they won't be doing any, of course, because you only get that FP1, then it's straight into sprint qualifying, then it's a sprint race, then it's qualifying for the Grand Prix. So you won't see any long runs at all. Pirelli, the one race where they need massive data for the race, because nobody's been to this circuit for a long time, they haven't been there with these cars or wheels, they don't have any data at all. Oh well, that's what they all want. Aaron Lee, go faster. Well, anyway, what's the significance? I think we talked about that in the last thing, but it's the significance of what we record in those free practice sessions is basically how the cars are going to go in the race, and you get a very, very clear picture of how it's going to go and what consistency you've got. And if you've got a Red Bull doing a 38.5 after 9 laps and a Ferrari doing a 39.7, you know that Red Bull have got much better time management. And if you've got Mercedes slower from lap 1 and then going off quickly, you know they've got serious problems. And if you relate what they're doing to the amount of wing they're running, in other words, the top speed they've got, that also brings in the propensity for the car to be manageable or not, and whether they can then add maybe a bit more front flap going into the race, and you can predict what sort of changes they're going to make and what sort of potential they might have for overtaking and passing. Perpetually biased. Hello, perpetually biased. Hey, Peter. Some time ago, the topic of Vettel had come up, and you'd mentioned why no one questioned why he suffered against Ricciardo in 14. Can you explain why he performed so poorly? Well, in my opinion, he performed so poorly because he has this. He doesn't manage the dynamic weights as well as Max, but he's got this feel. And this is a line thing. He's got this feel for sort of breaking into a point. It doesn't work on all corners, but works on 50% of the corners at most circuits. The other 50%, he's kind of basically like everybody else. But on those ones, he's really good. He just breaks into a rotation point and gets it absolutely perfect. He gets the rotation point and just straight lines it out. And it doesn't require the trade-off that Max uses and has on virtually all corners between initial steering load and braking, coming out of the brake pedal pressure at exactly the right rate and rotating the car at exactly the moment of least possible downside. In other words, extending the straight both ends really well. In Vettel's case, it's just like brake laid into this point, rotate and go. And that worked incredibly well when he had all that grip at the back of the Red Bull. But in that last year, a lot of that downforce went away. And if he didn't have the grip at the rear, he suddenly would rotate, and he had a loose rear, and he was kind of having to wait or get on the power, and then the back end would snap out. And all of a sudden, Daniel Ricciardo, who doesn't drive that way, but he's much more, but he's very soft on throttle and steering inputs, really nice, was getting much better performance from the car from mid-corner to exit. And the astonishing thing is that Vettel never understood that or realized that. And I suppose it's not that astonishing because that system had always worked for him. So he couldn't understand, I guess, why it wasn't working for him suddenly. And it wasn't working for him because they didn't have anything like the same downforce at the back of the car because of the regulation change. And so he went straight to Ferrari without really understanding, I think, where he needed to improve. And therefore, it never got any better at Ferrari. The car was better, but he didn't become the Sebastian Vettel that he had been at Red Bull, for example. I think that's what happened. It was all a question of downforce at the rear. East Bay Street. Good for Adrian driving at Mugello. Great track. We had 80 Ferraris start the race, headed into a tight turn 1. We all got through. Well, good to know that you were there, East Bay Street, and you survived. Excellent. We all got through, yeah, but how much bodywork damage was there? How much money did Ferrari Clientele make after that race? I hope they all got through without hitting one another. Good for Adrian, yeah. He's a very quick racing driver. Very quick. As is Zach Brown. Zach Brown is not slow at all. I don't know how many cars he's got now. It's got to be up in the 50s, I would think, race cars. Everything ranging from a Williams 14B to a Ayrton Senna Lotus Honda to a Mika Hakkinen McLaren. Zach can get in and drive them and do a very good job. I didn't realise this. I heard the other day he owns a some sort of Aussie V8 car as well, and he did a race at Laguna Seca in it against some quite quick cars and decent drivers, and he finished fourth with the thing unbelievably long gearing, because it had the Bathurst winning gearing, Conrod straight gearing, and he never got into. He's only stuck in fourth for the whole lap, I think. So yeah, Zach and Adrian, 2 races. Christian Horner's not bad, is he? Ought to have a race between that lot. That would be good. Wouldn't that be good? Instead of the BMW M1 thing, we have all the teams have to nominate a person from the team to race, from the management team to race in, I don't know what, minis or something. And some neutral car. Zach versus Adrian versus Christian. Versus Helmut Marko. Yeah, you can have 3 from Red Bull. There you go. Marko wouldn't be slow either, would he? Hey Peter, your thoughts on Ron being the downfall of McLaren? His stubbornness drove important people away, not least of all Newey. Nah, I would... yeah, Ron made mistakes. John Barnard didn't stay with him forever, nor did Adrian, and nor did Lewis for that matter. But, yeah, Ron did so much. I mean, it was Ron's confidence in John Barnard and his vision that this is the way to go that brought carbon chassis into Formula One, as we know and love them today. So that's one thing he brought us. He brought Lewis Hamilton as well, not an insignificant thing. There's just 2, let alone, I don't know how many championships and races he won at McLaren, but a lot. Mika Hakkinen, Kimi Räikkönen, you know. I think Ron's contribution has been amazing. So I would never put him under the heading of downfall of McLaren at all. They did pretty well post-Adrian, didn't they? Do you have any interesting interactional story about Enzo Ferrari from Casual Fan? Not really. I was lucky enough to go to a few press conferences, in December press conferences that Ferrari used to hold every year at Maranello with the journalists, and it was great. You know, Ferrari would fly us out there, and about 10 of us would arrive, and we'd be shepherded into this area for croissants and coffee, and then we'd go into the main interview area and we'd all sit down, and Enzo would be there with Luca Montezemolo and a few others, Mauro Foghieri, and Enzo would talk into a microphone in Italian, obviously, and you'd wear a headset for the English translation, and it would all be good positive stuff about Formula One, where we were going, the drivers, the cars, what his hopes were for the following season. And then we'd go out and we'd look at the new car out on track in Fiorano. A pretty nice day, actually. And then we'd all fly back that night. I was actually on the front cover of Autosprint one year. I think it was 76. When it's the new 76 Ferrari, the 312 T2. And the Autosprint front cover was that car, and I'm in the background wearing my jacket and tie, and I'm holding a rolled up poster, which is actually a poster that I'd been given. Well, I don't know if we were all given them, but it was a nice poster of Nicky in 75 in the car, a big photograph. And yeah, I'm in the background there. I thought, wow, there I am, front cover of Autosprint. So yeah, and every year I got him to sign my Ferrari, the Ferrari yearbook. They used to do a really nice yearbook, which they gave out to everybody, and then you'd go up afterwards to the desk, and Enzo would sign them with the immortal purple ink. And I would say something like "Salute, grazie," and he would wave and through the glasses. That was it. I never had a conversation with him, but yeah, those were the days, really. I don't think that happens anymore that way, does it? Sadly. Mohammed F.A. Jiwala. Hi Peter, instead of sprint race weekends, what about a parallel championship with the same drivers in a spec series car? I know the red tape would be a nightmare, but what are your thoughts? Well, we're just talking about that, yeah, with Adrian and Christian and Marco and Zach Brown and all those others racing as well. That'd be really good, wouldn't it? I don't know what they could have in order not to hurt themselves, B, to satisfy all the problems of clashing sponsors, and C, for it to be interesting to watch. What could they drive? Tractors or something? I don't know. No, I've said this before. It's a little bit of a long answer. For me, there needs to be a second B Division Formula One World Championship for last year's cars and semi-works support and all the young drivers who can't get into Formula One on the edge of it in the countries that want to be on the Formula One calendar but can't quite afford it or can't have to wait for the opportunity. And you have this B division Formula One World Championship, come up with a really cool name, and it would solve all the problems, actually, because then you'd have lots of young guys actually being given an opportunity to race. You'd have more chance to raise more money and to go to new markets from all these new countries. And you could, and anyway, many of them are now testing the old cars from a year or 2 years ago. So why not put that into a race package and make that not same weekend by any means, running its own world championship, and then you don't need to embellish Formula One with all these sprints and stuff like that. The reason that won't happen, part of the reason, is that Formula One wouldn't want that to detract from their big thing. They would think it would water down their championship, which is why it will never happen. That's what needs to happen. There are too many good young drivers out there who never ever are given the opportunity to race in Formula One, and it's sickening. How special was Lewis' rookie season? Oh, unbelievable. I remember being absolutely on the tip of my toes at the swimming pool, wanting to watch Lewis's first laps of Monaco in a Grand Prix car. And it wasn't in any way disappointing. Sort of lap 3 into the pool, it was wow. It was just like, watching anyone who'd been there for 100 years. He was just so good. So good. And you could argue no surprise, but it was, he was absolutely as good as Fernando out of the box. I'm sorry, he was just phenomenal. And I, that will, I always remember that 07 season as very special. I was lucky to be doing the interviews after the races and qualifying and, for the top 3. And he was always very, very polite, and he was just like a kid. I just can't believe I'm here. It was just like that. And he was what he was born on earth to do, he was doing. That was what it felt like. And I always, we had quite a, well, I'm not going to say any more about the friendship or anything, but I was very aware of his spirituality, and he was always open about talking about his spirituality and how lucky he was to have his God-given talent and this ability to drive racing cars of that quality. And he loved it. And it was a very special time. And that first win in Canada was, nobody deserved it more, really. And he got that in qualifying. Just how well he drove in qualifying, and how good he was under braking, high-speed braking, compared with Fernando. And Fernando made a slight mistake. And I've talked about this before, but as a result of that, Fernando demanded to have Hitco brakes put onto his car, and Lewis stayed with the Carbon Industries, and it worked for Fernando. We look at Monza, how quick he was at Monza with the Hitcos and the feel he had. He was great. But, the fact that Fernando had to insist on a different brake supplier in order to do that tells a lot, I think, about the talent of Lewis Hamilton. Alan B, love the channel, Peter. I love all things Formula One. Do you think we'll see a title fight next year? The Dutch anthem is becoming repetitive. Well, in theory, the nearer we get to the end of this championship and the regulations are just pushed to the limit and there is no further space in which to develop cars, everybody should sort of reach that limit, and it should be a really close year in 25. But, Red Bull found a lot over the winter of 23 to 24. It's not to say they aren't at the limit now. They may well be, but the way it looks is that they'll continue to develop this car into 25. And you look at the ineptness of everybody else, except Ferrari, you have to big question mark as to whether they'll ever manage to close the gap to Red Bull. It's astonishing, but true. Radomir Tasik, hey Peter, your memory is extraordinary. Do you keep a journal? No, my journal. Well, I've got a lot of diaries here actually, in my bookcase here, and I wonder if I can just sort of. There you go, in my bookcase. That's about one of about 5 I think I got in the house. I've got a lot of diaries, but they're mainly diaries I kept when I was working for Williams, and it's just like, meeting here and a time and stuff, rather than thoughts and memories. But luckily, I was able to write a lot during my career for magazines, and I've got all that, obviously. And there's a lot of stuff I wrote for magazines that in telex form for foreign language magazines, which a lot of people have never seen. So anyway, bottom line is I've always I don't know why, but when I go to a press conference, for example, or even today, if there's a driver sitting down outside his motorhome and there are 9 journalists around and all of them have tape recorders or they're writing stuff, I've never understood that, because maybe it's the size of my brain not being big enough, but when I talk to somebody, I don't like to write it down. I don't like to put it on tape even. I like to just listen and look into the eyes of the person to whom I'm speaking, understand what they're trying to say if English isn't their first tongue, and try to picture what they're talking about and put my mind in what they're doing and how they're describing something, and then have a real conversation with them and talk to them about things they're saying and try to really understand it. And when you do that and you really understand something rather than just writing it down because they've said it, it sticks. I find it sticks with you forever. And so I have all these different conversations and incidents and moments in my mind, in my brain, which are still there, crystal clear, technicolor, as if they happened only yesterday. And I suppose arrogantly I've thought, and stuff that I haven't really thought was very important, I haven't really remembered. I use my mind as a sort of sieve, really. And I'm sure a lot of my critics out there will say, well, Windsor doesn't know very much, or we'll keep it. But all I can do is what I do, and I love my sport. I don't talk about it and write about it because I want, for any reason other than I just like talking and writing about it. And I feel privileged even now to be sitting here talking to hopefully some people out there about something that I love and have a bit of experience and knowledge of. It's that, really. Daniel Gould, love the channel. All the best from Australia. Thank you very much. My original home team country, where I learnt and was privileged so much at that time, the Tasman series, to see Formula One close up, really. Jackie Stewart, Jim Clark, Graham Hill, Denny Hulme, Jack Brabham, Chris Amon, they were all there. Another super chat. Thank you very much, NC Paddock F1. If you wanted to see another manufacturer or two besides Audi come into Formula One, who would they be? Well, I'm a huge Porsche fan. I always have been. Their cars in general and the way they've gone about racing. And I've always thought it's very sad that they've never really done Formula One ever since they did it in 60. Well, they won that French Grand Prix in 62, and then that was it. So it'd be kind of nice to have Porsche back doing it. But the problem is, I know they were going to come back with Red Bull maybe, but the problem is Porsche are never going to come back if it costs them money. They're only going to come back if somebody pays their bills. So they probably never will come back. In that sense, I don't think they can be considered a manufacturer like Audi coming in and spending whatever it takes. I don't know. It'd be kind of fun, wouldn't it, to have BMW in again, have the 3 German companies, Merc, BMW and Audi, in Formula One. That'd be good fun. And as we say, they don't work weekends, so that'd be even more fun, wouldn't it? Race weekends. No, they do. Of course they do. Who else out there? Who do we have time for? I mean, I love rallying. So, some good companies out there have done well in rallying. Whether they progress and translate to Formula One, I don't know. The Skodas and the Hyundais and all the rest of it. Ford. I mean, I know Ford are coming back, the sort of badging of the Red Bull engine. But Ford, about time they did something a bit bigger and better in Formula One, isn't it? Do something properly. And Toyota. I'd love to see Toyota in Formula One. John Howett back again. I think they were given a bit like Michelin. They were not very well looked after by Formula One. I think they'd be better appreciated now with Liberty running the sport. And yeah, Toyota should be in Formula One, if I think about it. And I don't think it was the Cologne thing. I don't think it was anything other than they just weren't given enough freedom to go and do what they wanted to do. There's too many people criticizing them all the time, and that all built up. They should have all the opposition should have kept their mouths shut and realised how lucky they were to have the world's biggest car company in Formula One. But they didn't. They just kept on and on about it until they drove them out of the sport. Ridiculous. What's all this? Dr. Kazabubu. Hi, Peter. The new active aero regs. Will the cars have Pagani Hayora style, i.e. aero that will be constantly adapted, or simply flaps on or off in the front and rear like extended DRS? I don't know. It's a good question. It'd be interesting to see. I can't imagine that it'll be the constant adaptation. Oops, better decline this one, sorry. Or extended DRS. I haven't asked that question of anybody. I suspect it'll be like extension of DRS. It's mainly my guess, because I just think they'll be going too far into the budget cap ethos if they start having a purely fully adaptive aero. Guys, I'm going to have to sign off fairly soon. I've got school run coming up. I've been on for 2 hours. I'll do a couple more. Abnor Shala, hello Peter. Any advice for the kids that start karting? Take up golf? No, shouldn't be saying that. No, not really. I think the karting world is very, very professional. So it's kind of difficult if your children have got talent. It's kind of difficult not to find a pretty good team in which to develop that talent. It's all about money, of course. And if you're doing it on a shoestring, even at the karting level, it's going to be really, really difficult. If you've got a half reasonable budget, yeah, you're up and running. But then the problems only begin, because then you've got to have the budget to go to international level, and from there you've got to go into Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2. So money, very difficult. There's a 1 in a 1,000 chance if your child has Lewis Hamilton's talent, that he will get noticed and then be taken on a ride through the entire feeder series. And if you don't have that level of talent, is it worth doing it? That's the next question I suppose you need to ask. And you'll find out quite quickly in karting, I think, if you've got a half reasonable team, how good the children are. That's the good thing about it. Don't keep flogging a dead horse. If it's not clear that they're going to be really, really special, don't do it, would be my advice. Don't continue, would be my advice. It's too expensive and you'll end in tears in the end. So racing's just too expensive now. It's ridiculously expensive. I think there's one more super chat. Hi Peter, thanks for great chats. As a teenager, I was at the 83 Long Beach Grand Prix, not knowing that I was really watching. Can you recap that race? 83 Long Beach Grand Prix. Yeah, it was a... let me have a look. I better look up that run. Long Beach 83. Long Beach was a circuit I loved from day one. They'd started to modify it by then, and it wasn't quite as good as it was in, say, 76. But it was... hang on a sec. But it was still a great place. And it was... Let's have a look what happened that weekend. Patrick Tambay was on the pole. Wow, that was cool, wasn't it? Patrick, having taken over Gilles' drive, which was a very emotional thing for him to get the pole in Long Beach, bearing in mind his wife at that time, sadly they split up, but his wife at that time was Dana, who was Hawaiian, and Patrick had a great affinity for the United States, and his English was quite American branded or accented. So that was a really nice thing. Oh yeah, that was that Watty race, wasn't it? Watty at his absolute best in the Michelin-tired McLaren, beating Nicky. And I did my race report for Autocar, because I got there quite early when Nicky and Watty were doing a track walk on the Thursday, and I got a picture, and it was on the corner where he actually did eventually pass Nicky to win the race. Was this is where I'm going to pass you on Sunday, Nicky. That was the headline. There was the picture of them two standing there. Yeah, that was one of Watty's 2 great Grand Prix wins. The other, of course, is in Detroit. Similar thing, he was just brilliant. And I should be admonished for not mentioning John when I was coming up with great overtakers and attacking drivers, because what John did, admittedly in a time when it was Michelin and Goodyear and they were on Michelin and the McLaren was a good car, but it was still how he beat Nicky. It was just brilliant, and good luck to John Watson. Good luck. I may be wrong here, but I think that was the race where Ron Dennis actually met Lisa, his wife. I may be wrong. I think it was that year. I think she was in Long Beach that year working. And so Nicky set fastest lap. John won it. Rennie Arnoux third in the other Ferrari. Wow, yeah. Great times. Long Beach was a fabulous race. because there was always a good pro celebrity race and quite a lot of Hollywood people there, and it's a great atmosphere. Everybody, even then in '83, they were still all basically under one roof in the tech center thing where all the cars were, and you could look at all the damage, and one team next to another, and mechanics would be lending nuts and bolts and bits and bobs to teams next door. And quite often you'd find, say, McLaren and Williams, a good example, that there would be sort of, it wasn't unspoken or unwritten, but there would be a relationship between the two chief mechanics. That, okay, we'll bring some extra ones of those, and you bring some extra bits of that, and then we'll swap when we get there. I don't think the team principals ever found out, but it was a good way of, of the teams of not over cramming their freight and mix and matching and sharing. A lot of that went on. Yeah, it was a lovely time. Long Beach was a great race, and sadly, all those days are over, aren't they? Long Beach this weekend, of course, for IndyCar, isn't it? Not quite the same, different circuit layout, but Mario's going to be there. Jackie Stewart's going to be there. Those two will have a laugh together, won't they? Brilliant. Have Lance Stroll's dad. I think Real Shomper, that's probably in response to me saying get some of these team principal management people in a race. Yeah, Lawrence Stroll was actually quite quick in Ferraris, wasn't he? Quentin Hirschfeld. Hi, Peter. Why do you rate George so much higher than Carlos? So far, I believe he hasn't proven to be any better, frankly. Carlos beat Lando and is extremely close to Charles's race pace. He didn't actually beat Lando, did he? He was actually behind him on qualifying. So I think it was the very best they were 50-50 at McLaren. But anyway, that's not the point. You're saying, why do I rate him so much higher than Carlos? I think he's a little bit quicker on the lap. I just think he is. Can't really say any more than that. I just think he's a little bit more reflexy, I suppose, is what I'm saying. He's just a little bit more reflexy, and if there's a bump and the car goes, I think George will catch it. And I think Carlos is a little bit more rounded and a little bit less able to catch those reflexy high-speed moments. That's one area. But what I really mean when I say that is that I don't think it'll be great for Carlos to go to Mercedes for 1 year with George in the other car, who's well entrenched in the team, knows everybody, knows how the team operates. It's not an easy year for Carlos Sainz to go in and blow George away, is what I'm really saying. And I'm not saying that I really rate George much higher than Carlos. In fact, if I had a team tomorrow and it was George or Carlos, I'd probably take Carlos as a driver, because I think he's got a lot of great qualities in a lot of areas. But in terms of outright pace for one lap, I think George is a little bit quicker than Carlos. A little bit. That's all I think. But it doesn't mean to say that I rate him much higher than I do Carlos. I think Carlos has got some fabulous qualities. But I think he's a bit smoother, really, and he doesn't like it when he's got to be edgy in the car, whereas George is kind of quite good in edgy situations. That makes sense. Melissa Cruz, another one. Thank you. I look forward to your insight every week. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you very much. Very kind. Okay, a couple more, then we'll go. I'm going to go right to the bottom. Fernando Paulino, do you find yourself more interested in the sport of motorsport or the art of driving? Conversation with Peter Windsor. I think the art of driving. I've always been fascinated by that and the differences between drivers, whether it was Kevin Bartlett and Greg Cusack and Frank Maddich, three great Australian drivers, Spencer Martin, or whether it was Jim Clark, Graham Hill, Chris Amon, Denny Hulme. They all look different. And if you're a flag marshal out on the circuit, you see that, and you can see all the differences in the way they're moving their hands on the wheel, and the way the throttle's being used, and the way the car's moving in the corner. And I've always found that fascinating. I just love the concept of a completely open track with no traffic coming towards you. You can use all the road, and what are you going to do with that car? How are you going to manipulate that car to the point where you get the absolute physical maximum from it? And what is that physical maximum? How do you measure it, and what is that? I've always found that very fascinating. Safety Dragon. Hi, Peter. In a sport with so much attention to detail, why are we still dealing with tear-offs? Isn't there a better way to handle those than just tossing them onto the track? It's a bit like saying, all these unbelievable Adrian Newey hypercar, why do they still have windscreen wipers? Incredibly archaic. Isn't there something better? A tear-off. I mean, this business of tearing them off and throwing them out and then getting stuck in somebody else's brake duct is what we're really talking about, I think. Is there some way around that problem? Obviously there isn't, because we've got very good helmet manufacturers now, whether it be Arai, Bell, Schubert, whatever. We've got some very good ones, and if there was a better way, then we'd do it. But you don't want to bring too much complication into a helmet, like a visor that's self-cleaning or whatever, like the lens of a camera, because the more junk you have on the helmet, more stuff can go wrong, the heavier it is. So they try to keep it as simple as possible. And the whole tear-off thing is, it began 71. You can blame Chris Amon for this. 71 Italian Grand Prix. He's leading. He's in this massive bunch, dicing in the slipstream Monza with no chicanes. Everybody changing places. He's in the Matra, beautiful V12 Matra. And he eventually breaks away from the group, unheard of. And he's sprinting towards the line with nobody in his tow, and he cannot lose. He's going to win his first Grand Prix. So in relief, he goes to just clean his visor, and the old visor comes off in his hand, and he can't see where he's going. He loses the race. If they'd had strip-offs back then, he would have won the race. And so strip-offs were invented, and they do get in the way. It's a bit like lunar rubbish, isn't it? Stuff they leave on the moon or in space. I saw the other day somebody got hit, somebody in Florida, I think, a bit of debris from a sort of 5-year-old space debris, which was a crate of batteries, had supposed to burn out as it came through the atmosphere, but a part survived and landed in Florida. A bit like all that junk, all the stuff that's left on top of Mount Everest. What do we do with those tear-offs? From now on, littering is forbidden in Formula One, and your tear-off must be placed neatly in the side of the cockpit and not thrown out. Maybe we need that. Speaking of which, I don't know why I suddenly thought of it. What about Sebastian Vettel's bumblebees and all that stuff? What's happening with all that? It seems to have gone a bit quiet. It was a big thing, wasn't it? I thought we were going to see them at other racetracks. Or did I misread the press release there? There you go. Surely they can leave the tear-off in the cabin. I think you mean cockpit. Yeah, well, they should. Absolutely right. And there were drivers. Let me think. Alan Jones was one for sure. I think Mario always had a rag between their legs that they would use for wiping or doing something. They just never got in the car without that rag there. They're all drivers, throw it out, litter. So anyway, yeah, we're coming back. Peugeot, Arsène Martins, Peugeot would be good. Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to Enrique Scalabroni the other day, who designed the Peugeot Le Mans winning car and the Formula One engine. And he's designing houses and aircraft right now. Very impressive. Killian Gibbs, he ignored my phone call. Okay. Mohammed Gimana, you're a gem, Peter. Don't say. By the way, update. Remember I said that I'd emailed Toto Wolff to say that an F1 engineer, current F1 engineer, had contacted me with no ties, could leave tomorrow. Very good guy, in my opinion, and I would put the two in touch. And still no reply from Toto. So Mercedes obviously got it all sorted now. They know where they're going. No problems. So Arsène Martin says, both Newey and Brown will participate in the historic Monaco Grand Prix this year. Book my tickets to see them. Good. Great. Well, that'd be wonderful. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. I think we're kind of out of time now. Yeah, I've got to go. Got to go. School run and all stuff after that. So thank you very much, everyone. And look forward to the Chinese Grand Prix this weekend. I'll be doing the normal videos, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And, it's a sprint race, isn't it, Saturday? We've got so much going on. It's all a bit of a weird weekend, but we'll get there and it's going to be fun. Turn 7 is the one, as I say, that I think will be the one worth watching, and looking forward to see if they've got the good camera angles there as well. And how many people in the grandstands? That's going to be a good one. Let's hope there are lots there to watch Guan Yu and everybody else do their thing. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for your input. Brilliant as ever to do this. I'm the privileged one, and it's great fun to interface with all of you. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow, won't I? Take care.